Billionaire sees boy feeding homeless in the rain. His reaction makes everyone cry. The rain poured heavily over the overpass in downtown New York City when Richard Thompson stepped out of his armored car to see what had happened. His driver had slammed on the brakes after spotting something on the street that made him hesitate. Richard looked out the window, but couldn't understand what had caught Frank's attention. Then, he saw the scene that would change his life forever. A small boy no older than 9 walked through the rain carrying a soaked paper bag. His simple clothes, a patched-up denim overall, were completely drenched, yet he kept moving with determination among the people sheltering under the bridge. Richard watched, mesmerized, as the boy approached an elderly woman sitting on the ground, wrapped in old, tattered blankets. The boy opened the wet bag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. With a smile that lit up his face, he offered the food to her. "Mrs. Gladys, I brought you a bologna sandwich. It's still warm," the boy said in a sweet voice that carried even over the sound of the rain. The woman lifted her eyes, and Richard could see tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She reached out with trembling hands and accepted the gift with a gratitude that touched the businessman's heart deeply. "Michael, my angel, you shouldn't be out here in the rain," Mrs. Gladys replied weakly, her voice full of affection. "You'll get sick, child." "It's okay, Grandma. The rain doesn't hurt me, but hunger hurts you," Michael said, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. Richard felt something stir in his chest. How long had it been since he'd witnessed such a pure, selfless act? He, who controlled a billion-dollar construction empire, couldn't remember the last time he'd done something for someone without expecting anything in return. The boy continued his walk, stopping for each person under the bridge. From the bag, he pulled what looked like homemade sandwiches, cookies, and fruit, all simple, but offered with a love Richard had never seen before. "Mr. Richard, should we go?" asked Frank, the driver, breaking the silence in the car. "Wait," Richard replied, unable to look away. "I want to watch a little longer." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Michael had reached a younger man with a skinny dog beside him. The boy crouched down, petting the animal before offering food to both. Richard watched as the boy treated each person with the same respect and dignity, as if they were his own family. But it was when Michael returned to Mrs. Gladys that Richard's world turned upside down. The boy sat beside her in the rain and began talking to her as if she were the most important person in the world. "How was your day today, Grandma Gladys?" Michael asked, taking off his small cap and placing it over her gray hair to shield her from the rain. "Better now that you're here, my angel. You're the best part of my day," she replied, stroking his face with a hand shaking from the cold. Richard couldn't stay in the car any longer. Something inside him screamed to step out to meet this extraordinary boy. He opened the door and stepped into the rain, feeling the icy water soak his $5,000 Italian suit. Frank was alarmed. "Mr. Richard, what are you doing? You'll get soaked." "Stay here, Frank. I'm going to talk to the boy," Richard said, walking toward the overpass. His imported leather shoes splashed through puddles as he slowly approached. He didn't want to startle Michael or the people gathered there. When he got closer, he could hear the conversation between the boy and Mrs. Gladys more clearly. "Michael, are you sure your mother doesn't get upset when you come here?" the older woman asked with concern. "She doesn't know, Grandma. If she did, she'd be scared of me walking alone on the street. But I know how to take care of myself, and you all need me," the boy replied with a maturity beyond his years. "And where do you get all this food, child? Your family isn't rich, I know that." Michael lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "I help out at Mr. Walter's bakery after school. He gives me some day-old bread, and I ask my mom to make sandwiches. She thinks it's for my school lunch, but I eat a little and bring the rest to you." Richard felt a lump in his throat. That boy was going hungry to feed others. He was lying to his own mother just to get food for the homeless. What kind of child did something like that? He stepped closer, and Michael noticed him. The boy tensed, clearly unused to well-dressed men in that place. "Hi," Richard said, trying to sound friendly. "Can I talk to you?" Michael stood up quickly, positioning himself protectively in front of Mrs. Gladys. "Are you from the city?" They're not doing anything wrong, it's just a place to stay dry. The boy's reaction took Richard by surprise. At just 9 years old, Michael had already learned to defend these people as if they were his responsibility. "No, I'm not from the city," Richard said, raising his hands to show he meant no trouble. "I just wanted to meet you. I saw you giving food to everyone and it impressed me." Michael relaxed slightly but remained cautious. "What do you want?" "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Why do you do this? Why do you take care of these people?" The boy looked at Mrs. Gladys, then at the others under the overpass, and finally back at Richard. "Because they're my friends, and friends take care of each other. But you're just a kid, it shouldn't be your responsibility. My mum always says if you can help, you should." "I can, so I do," Michael replied simply. Richard fell silent for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. He, who had the means to help thousands, had never thought that way. There were always reasons not to get involved, too complicated, too much bureaucracy, other institutions for that. "What's your name?" Richard asked. Michael Wilson, and you?" Richard Thompson." The name meant nothing to the boy, which somehow pleased Richard. Here, under the overpass in the rain, he wasn't the billionaire owner of the country's most powerful construction company. He was just a man talking to an extraordinary child. "Michael, would you like me to help you help these people?" Richard asked impulsively. The boy eyed him skeptically. "How?" "Well, I have resources. I could buy more food, blankets, maybe even a better shelter." Michael thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No need, Mr. Richard. We manage fine on our own." The refusal surprised Richard. How many people had begged for his financial help, and here was a 9-year-old turning him down. "But I want to help," Richard insisted. "Why?" Michael asked, the direct question catching Richard off guard. "Why, indeed?" Richard searched for an answer but realized he didn't have a clear reason. It was just an impulse, something that had stirred inside him after witnessing such pure kindness. Because you taught me something today, and I want to give back." Michael smiled for the first time since Richard had approached him. "What did I teach you?" "That helping doesn't have to be complicated. That all it takes is wanting to." Mrs. Gladys, who had been silently observing the whole conversation, finally spoke. "Richard, this boy is an angel sent to us by God. If you really want to help, come here more often. Talk with us. Learn our story." Richard nodded, feeling he had found something he didn't know he was searching for. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Of course," said Michael, "but leave the big car behind. It scares everyone." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh he hadn't had in years. "Deal." He said goodbye and returned to his car, completely soaked, but with a heart lighter than he'd felt in decades. Frank looked at him with concern. "Sir, are you all right? You're all wet." "I'm great, Frank, better than I've been in a long time." On the way home, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Michael. How had a 9-year-old boy developed so much compassion, and why had he, with all the resources in the world, never felt the urge to do something similar? When he arrived at his mansion in the Upper East Side, Richard went straight to his office. Still in his wet clothes, he called his personal assistant. "Jennifer, I need you to do some research for me." "Of course, Mr. Thompson. What about?" "I want to know everything. About the homeless situation downtown. How many there are, where they stay, what kind of help they receive." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "May I ask why, sir?" "I'm thinking of starting a social project." "What kind of project?" Richard hesitated. He wasn't even sure himself. "I don't know yet. Just research it first, please." After hanging up, Richard went to take a hot shower, but his mind stayed under the Broadway overpass with Michael and Mrs. Gladys. He tried to remember the last time he had done something genuinely selfless and realized he couldn't. His company, Thompson Builders, was an impressive financial success. Richard had built his empire from nothing, starting as a laborer and reaching the top through hard work and determination. But on the path to success, he had lost something essential: human connection. That night, Richard barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Michael smile as he offered food to Mrs. Gladys. He saw the gratitude in the woman's eyes. He saw the simplicity and purity of that gesture. The next day, Richard woke with a strange feeling. For the first time in years, he was eager to leave the office. He spent the whole day watching the clock, waiting for the moment to return to the overpass. At 5 in the afternoon, he dismissed Frank and took his personal car, a modest sedan he rarely used. He drove downtown feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. When he arrived at the overpass, Michael was already there, again with his bag of food. This time it wasn't raining, but the sky was cloudy and threatening. "Hi, Richard," Michael called when he saw the businessman approaching. "You really came back?" "Of course I did, I said I would." Michael grinned and ran up to him. "Want to help me hand out the food today?" Richard's heart raced. "You'd let me?" "Sure. You seem nice, and your hands are clean so you can handle food." Michael's innocent remark made Richard laugh. The boy had noticed he had clean hands, probably the first time anyone had seen him that way, instead of as the powerful businessman Richard Thompson. Michael opened the bag and showed Richard the contents: bologna sandwiches, some with cheese, slightly bruised fruit, and a few homemade cookies. "My mum made these cookies special today. I think she suspected I haven't been eating much at home," Michael said with a mischievous smile. "She doesn't know you come here?" "No. If I had known, I would have been worried. My mother already has enough to worry about." Richard wanted to ask more about Michael's family, but noticed the boy changed the subject whenever it came up. Instead, he followed Michael on his routine of distributing food. Their first stop was with Mrs. Gladys, who greeted Richard like an old friend. "Richard, so good to see you again. I thought I'd never see you anymore." "I don't usually break my word," Richard said, crouching down to her level. "Michael told me you're an important man, own a big company." Richard looked at Michael, surprised. "You knew who I was?" The boy shrugged. "I asked Mr. Walter at the bakery. He knows everyone around here. Said you're Richard Thompson, the one who builds those huge buildings. And yet you didn't want my help yesterday?" "Money doesn't fix everything, Uncle Richard. What fixes things is kindness, and kindness can't be bought." Michael's words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. A 9-year-old had summed up in one sentence all the wisdom he had lost over the years. They continued handing out food to others. Richard met Robert, a 50-year-old man who had lost his job and ended up on the streets after failing to pay rent. He met Sharon, a 40-year-old woman with mental health struggles, abandoned by her family. He met Frank, curiously sharing the same name as his driver, a young man in his early 20s battling addiction and trying to recover. Each story was a world of pain and abandonment, but also resilience and dignity. Richard wondered how he had never noticed these people before, even though he passed through the area every day on his way to the office. When they finished distributing the food, Michael sat on the ground beside Mrs. Gladys and Richard joined them, not minding the dirt on his suit. "Michael, can I ask you a personal question?" Richard said. "Sure. Where's your father?" Michael's face darkened for a moment. "I don't have a father, never did." "And your mother, does she work?" "Yeah, a lot. She cleans houses for rich ladies during the day and works at a diner at night. That's why I have to take care of myself after school." Richard began to understand the story. Michael was practically raising himself, with a mother working 16 hours a day to support them. Yet instead of resentment or anger, the boy had found a way to care for others. "How did you meet everyone here?" Richard continued. "Oh, I always passed by on my way to Mr. Walter's bakery. One day it was raining hard, and I saw Grandma Gladys here soaked and hungry. I couldn't just walk away without helping." "How long have you been doing this?" Michael thought for a moment. "About 6 months. Started just with Grandma Gladys, but then others came, and I couldn't help some and ignore the rest, right?" Richard nodded, impressed by the boy's simple yet powerful logic. "Michael, have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be like my uncle." "Your uncle? I thought you didn't have family besides your mom." "Not by blood. It's Uncle Dave, who lives in the apartment next to ours. He's taught me a lot." "What kind of things?" "He said life is made of choices. Every moment we can choose to be selfish or generous. Choose to help or pretend we didn't see. He always chooses to help. And what does Uncle Dave do? He's a building superintendent. Doesn't make much money, but he always has a plate of food for someone in need. Always has good advice, always has a hug. Richard felt a pang of envy. He had all the money in the world, but when was the last time someone had come to him for a hug or advice? When was the last time he himself had offered that to someone? Michael, I want to propose something to you. The boy looked at him curiously. I want to get more involved here, not just by giving money, but actually helping. Can you teach me? Michael smiled. Of course, but it has to be every day. It can't be one of those rich people things where you help when you feel like it. Every day? Every day. The folks here need to know they can count on us. If you only show up when you feel like it, it won't make a difference. Richard thought about his packed schedule, the important meetings, the million-dollar contracts. But he looked at Mrs. Gladys, at Robert, at Sharon, at all those faces that had become real to him in just 2 days. Deal. Every day. Michael extended his small hand, and Richard shook it, sealing a commitment that would change both their lives. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The following week, Richard began keeping his promise. Every day after work, he drove to the overpass to meet Michael and help with the food distribution. At first, it was hard to balance with his routine. Meetings that ran late, urgent calls, problems at the company. Everything seemed to conspire to keep him from his commitment. But Michael had been clear, every day, and Richard was determined not to disappoint the boy. On the third day, Richard arrived later than usual. Michael had already handed out all the food and was talking with Mrs. Gladys when he saw the businessman approaching. I thought you weren't coming today, Michael said, but without any reproach in his tone. I promised I'd come every day. Had a meeting that wouldn't end, but I'm here. We've already given everything out. But you can talk to the folks, they like it when you come. It was true. In the few days he'd spent there, Richard had formed a genuine connection with those people. They didn't know about his wealth or social status. To them, he was just Richard, Michael's friend. Richard sat down next to Robert, the 50-year-old man who had lost his job. How was your day, Robert? Better, Richard. Got some odd jobs today, helped a family move, made $50. That's great. Yeah, it's enough to buy a few things I need. And there's even a little left to share with those who didn't get work today. Once again, Richard was struck by the generosity of these people. Robert, who had so little, was already thinking about sharing what he'd earned with others. Robert, can I ask you something? How did you lose your job? Robert's face grew somber. Worked 20 years at the same company, a building materials warehouse. Always on time, never missed a day, never stole a thing. Then a new manager came in younger and he thought I was too old, made up an excuse and let me go. Richard felt a familiar discomfort. How many times had his own company laid off older workers to hire younger ones for lower wages? It was common practice in the industry, justified by numbers, by competitiveness. But here, looking at Robert's face, Richard saw the human cost of those decisions. Did you try finding another job? Tried, but at 50, with no college. Degree, it's not easy. People want younger folks. And when they find out I'm living on the street, Robert shook his head, then nobody wants me at all. Do you have experience in construction? Yeah, worked with building materials, my whole life. Know everything, cement, steel, lumber, paint. Can calculate quantities, check quality. Richard grew thoughtful. His company was always in need of experienced people to oversee materials at construction sites. Robert seemed to have exactly the profile they were looking for. Robert, would you like to work with me? The man looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean? I own a construction company. We're always in need of experienced people to check the quality of materials delivered to the job sites. Robert fell silent for a long moment. Are you serious? I am. But Richard, you've only known me for 3 days. You don't know if I'm trustworthy, if I can do the job right. Michael trusts you. And I trust Michael's judgment. Robert looked at Michael, who had approached and overheard part of the conversation. "Uncle Richard, are you giving Uncle Robert a job?" the boy asked, his eyes shining. "If he wants it." Robert began to cry. Thick tears rolled down his bearded face. "It's been 6 months since anyone offered me a job. 6 months living on the streets, feeling ashamed, feeling useless. So do you accept?" "I do, of course I do, but—" Robert hesitated. "I'll need some time to get myself together. I don't have proper clothes, nowhere to shower. We'll figure it out. Can you start Monday?" "Yes." Michael jumped for joy and hugged both Robert and Richard. "See, Uncle Richard, I told you you were cool." But Richard's happiness was cut short when he got home that night. His wife, Catherine, was waiting for him in the living room with an unfriendly expression. "Richard, we need to talk." "About what?" "About where you've been spending your days. Coming home late, your clothes dirty, talking about social projects. What's going on?" Richard sighed. He knew this conversation was coming eventually. "I've met some people who need help. I'm trying to do my part." "What people?" "Homeless folks, downtown." Catherine looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Homeless people? Richard, you own a billion-dollar company. You can't go getting involved with those kinds of people." "What kinds of people?" "You know exactly what I mean. Addicts, criminals, dangerous people. What if someone finds out? What if they try to kidnap you?" "Catherine, you don't know them. They're good people who've fallen on hard times." "Richard, you're being naive. And besides, you're neglecting your family and your company over this phase you're going through." "It's not a phase. It's important to me." "More important than your family?" Catherine's question hit Richard hard. He looked at his wife of 15 years and realized there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before. When was the last time they'd had a truly intimate conversation? When was the last time he'd come home eager to share about his day? "Of course it's not more important than you, but it matters to me as a person." "Richard, you have responsibilities. The company needs you. Your employees depend on you. Your clients trust you. You can't just go handing out food on the streets like some volunteer." "Why can't I?" "Because you're not just some volunteer. You're Richard Thompson. You have a reputation to uphold." Richard fell silent, processing his wife's words. She wasn't wrong about his responsibilities. He did have enormous obligations. But there was also something new in his life, something that gave him a purpose money had never provided. "Catherine, I won't stop helping these people. And I won't accept my husband lowering himself like this." The conversation ended in a stalemate, leaving a palpable tension in the house. Richard went to bed thinking about how to balance his new mission with his family duties. The next morning, Richard arrived at the office and asked his assistant, Jennifer, to come to his room. "Jennifer, remember that research I asked for about the homeless?" "Yes, sir. I'm still gathering data." "I want you to add one more thing. I want to know about job re-entry programs, specifically for people over 45. May I ask if this is for a company project?" Richard hesitated. "It's a personal project, but it might end up involving the company." Jennifer took her notes and left the room, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. He had promised a job to Robert, but now he needed to figure out how to make it work in practice. It wasn't just a matter of goodwill. There were protocols, bureaucracy, internal resistance. Richard called his HR director, Anthony Miller, a 50-year-old man who had worked at the company for 10 years. "Anthony, I need your help with a special hire." "Of course, Mr. Thompson. What kind of profile are we looking for?" "A 50-year-old man, experience in construction materials, to work as a quality inspector on site." "Interesting. Do you already have someone in mind?" "I do, but there's a complication. He's in a vulnerable situation." Anthony raised his eyebrows. "How so?" "He's homeless." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Anthony looked at Richard as if trying to decipher a joke. "Mr. Thompson, are you serious?" "Completely serious." "But, sir, we have protocols. Background checks, professional references, medical exams. How are we supposed to do that with someone who's homeless?" "We'll adapt the protocols. Sir, with all due respect, this could set a dangerous precedent if we start hiring people without proper vetting." "Anthony, I'm not asking to skip the vetting. I'm asking to find a way to do it even under special circumstances." What if he doesn't pass the exams? What if he has drug problems? What if he has a criminal record? If he's not fit, we don't hire him. Simple as that. But we'll give him the opportunity. Anthony sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Mr. Thompson, can I speak frankly? Of course. The company has a reputation to uphold. Our clients, our investors, expect a certain standard. Hiring homeless people could send the wrong message about our values. What message would that be? That we're desperate for workers, or that we don't have strict hiring criteria. Richard felt irritation rising. Or it could send the message that we're a company that gives opportunities to qualified people, regardless of their current situation. Sir, with all due respect, that's a very idealistic view. The market doesn't work that way. Maybe it's time the market started working that way. The meeting ended with Anthony reluctantly agreeing to prepare the paperwork for Robert's hiring, but Richard could sense the man's resistance. It wouldn't be easy to implement his new ideas in a traditional corporate structure. Later that afternoon, Richard met Michael as usual. The boy was excited about the news of Robert's job, but Richard was worried about the difficulties he'd faced during the day. "Michael, can I ask you something?" Richard said as he helped hand out sandwiches. "Sure." "Have you ever wanted to give up? To stop helping the people here?" Michael thought for a moment. "Yeah, once my mum found out I was coming here and got really mad, said it was dangerous, that I could get into trouble, forbade me from coming back." "And what did you do?" "I disobeyed." Michael said it with a simplicity that surprised Richard. "Not because I wanted to disobey my mom, I love her, but because I knew I was doing the right thing." "How did you know?" "Because when you're doing the right thing, you feel it in your chest. It's a good feeling, even when people don't understand." Richard nodded, recognizing exactly the feeling Michael was describing. That's what he felt when he was there, helping those people. That's what he had lost somewhere along his journey to success. "And your mother, is she still against it?" "She still doesn't know." Michael lowered his voice. "I know it's wrong to lie to her, but sometimes you have to choose between two right things, and I choose to keep helping." Michael's wisdom once again impressed Richard. The boy had found a way to balance his love for his mother with his mission to help others. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was practical and effective. "Michael, what do you think I should do when people don't understand why I want to help you all?" "You keep helping," Michael answered without hesitation. "People are sometimes afraid of what they don't know. But when they see you're doing something good, they'll understand. And if they never understand, then that's their problem, not yours. You can't stop doing what's right just because other people don't agree." Richard smiled. For a moment, he forgot he was talking to a 9-year-old. Michael had a moral clarity that many adults had lost over the years. That night, Richard arrived home determined to have an honest conversation with Catherine. He found his wife in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Catherine, I need to tell you more about what I'm doing." She looked at him with a cautious expression. "I'm listening." "I met a 9-year-old boy who taught me something about what it really means to help people, and I've met several people who made me rethink a lot of things about my life." "Richard, let me finish, please." Richard took a deep breath. "I know you're worried about my safety, our reputation, my responsibilities, and you're right to be concerned. But I'm also right to want to do something that goes beyond business. I understand you want to help people, but there are more, appropriate ways. You can donate money to organizations, sponsor social projects. I've thought about that, but it's not the same. These people don't just need money. They need someone to see them as human beings. And that someone has to be you? Why can't it be me?" Catherine fell silent for a moment, stirring the food on the stove. "Richard, I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you'll lose yourself in this obsession. Afraid you'll put yourself in danger. Afraid our life will change in a way I can't keep up with." Richard finally understood what was happening. Catherine wasn't just worried about safety or reputation. She was afraid of losing him to something she didn't understand. "Catherine, I won't lose myself. In fact, I'm finding myself." "But does that mean you were lost before?" The question caught Richard off guard. Had he been lost before? Looking back at the last few years of his life, Richard realized he had been. lost in a routine of work, money, and social obligations that brought him no real satisfaction. "Maybe I was," he admitted, "but now I know where I'm going." "And where is that?" "I don't know yet, but I know it's the right place." The conversation didn't resolve everything, but Richard felt he had planted a seed of understanding in Catherine. Changes like this didn't happen overnight, especially when they involved people you loved. The following Monday, Richard accompanied Robert to the Thompson Builders headquarters for his first day of work. He had spent the weekend helping the man prepare. They bought proper clothes. Robert showered at a city shelter and managed to shave and get a haircut. The physical transformation was impressive, but Richard could see the emotional transformation was even greater. Robert walked with his posture straight, looked people in the eye and spoke with confidence. Work had restored his dignity. "Richard, I don't know how to thank you," Robert said as they stepped into the elevator. "You don't have to thank me. You just have to do good work. You can count on me. I'll work like I've never worked before." When they arrived at the Human Resources Department, Anthony greeted them with a professional courtesy that barely masked his discomfort. "Robert, it's a pleasure to meet you. Let's start with the medical exams and then I'll explain your duties." During the exams, Richard waited nervously. What if Robert really had health issues? What if the doctors found traces of drugs in his system? Richard realized he had made a decision based more on his heart than his head, and now he prayed it would work out. 2 hours later, Anthony returned with Robert, an expression of surprise on his face. "Mr. Thompson, may I speak with you privately?" Richard followed Anthony to his office, leaving Robert waiting in the reception area. "Well?" Richard asked. "The exams are all normal. No traces of drugs, no significant health problems, and I asked a few questions about professional experience. And, Mr. Thompson, this man knows more about construction materials than many of our engineers. He spotted cement quality issues even our technicians hadn't noticed." Richard smiled, feeling a mix of relief and pride. "So he's hired?" "He is. And honestly, sir, I think it was an excellent hire. I just hope he adjusts well to the work environment." "Why wouldn't he?" "Well, other employees might be uncomfortable with his past situation. People talk, ask questions. Anthony, Robert's past is no one's business. What matters is the work he does from now on." "Of course, sir. But you know how it is." Richard did know. He knew there would be prejudice, whispers, suspicious looks, but he also knew Robert would have to face it to rebuild his life. When Richard told Michael about Robert's first day at work, the boy beamed. "See, Uncle Richard? I knew it would work out." "How did you know?" "Because Uncle Robert is a good person, and good people always find a way to win." Richard wished he had Michael's confidence. The boy saw the world with a simplicity Richard had long lost. To Michael, being a good person was enough for things to work out. To Richard, life had become much more complicated than that. But maybe Michael was right. Maybe life was simpler than Richard had learned to believe. Maybe it really was enough to try to be a good person. The following weeks brought a new routine for Richard. Every day after work, he went to the overpass to meet Michael and help with the food distribution. Every day, he learned more about the stories of the people who lived there. And every day, he felt himself becoming a different person. Robert adjusted well to the job and quickly became one of the company's most respected employees. His experience and dedication impressed even the most skeptical. Soon other employees were seeking his opinion on technical matters. But Richard noticed his involvement with the homeless was causing ripples in other parts of his life. Clients made comments about his new hobby. Other business owners joked about his humanitarian phase. Catherine remained uncomfortable with the situation, though she had stopped openly protesting. It was Michael who brought the next challenge. "Uncle Richard, can I ask you something?" the boy said one day as they spoke with Mrs. Gladys. "Of course, what do you need?" "It's not for me, it's for Sharon." Richard looked at Sharon, the 40-year-old woman with mental health issues. She was sitting alone, as usual, talking quietly to herself. "What happened to Sharon? She's getting worse. Sometimes she goes days without eating because she forgets. And when it rains hard, she can't find proper shelter because she gets confused." "Does she need medical help?" "She does. But she's afraid of doctors?" Had some bad experiences in the past? Richard looked at Sharon and felt his heart tighten. How could a society allow people in such conditions to live abandoned on the streets? What do you want me to do, Michael? Do you know any good doctors, someone who'd treat her with kindness? Richard thought for a moment. He knew several doctors, but mostly from social events or business meetings. He wasn't sure if any of them would have the patience and sensitivity needed to help Sharon. "Let me see what I can do," said Richard, "but it'll take some time." "That's okay. Sharon has waited a long time already. She can wait a little longer." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Richard called his personal doctor, Dr. William Brown, a renowned psychiatrist who worked at one of the city's most expensive hospitals. "William, I need a favor." "Of course, Richard. What do you need?" "Do you know any psychiatrists who do volunteer work? Someone who treats people in need? May I ask why?" Richard hesitated. How could he explain his new life to William without sounding completely crazy? "I met someone who needs help. She has mental health issues and is homeless." "Richard, you know I don't treat that kind of patient. My practice is private, very expensive." "I'm not asking you to treat her. I'm asking if you know anyone who works with that profile." "Well, there's Dr. Mark Anderson. He works in the public system and does some volunteer work." "But Richard, these cases are very complicated. Homeless people usually have complex issues: addiction, trauma, family, abandonment. Can you give me his contact?" "I can, but Richard, can I give you some advice? These people are a bottomless pit. You could spend a lot of money and energy and see no results." Richard was irritated by the comment. "William, this person has a name. It's Sharon. And she's not a bottomless pit. She's a human being who needs help." Of course. Sorry if I misspoke. It's just... Well, never mind. I'll send you Dr. Mark's contact." After hanging up, Richard kept thinking about William's reaction. It was the same attitude he found in almost everyone he knew, a mix of condescension and detachment. As if people like Sharon were a different category of humanity. The next day, Richard called Dr. Mark Anderson. The conversation was completely different. "Dr. Mark, my name is Richard Thompson. Dr. William Brown gave me your contact." "Hi, Richard. William mentioned you're interested in social work. Is that true?" "Yes. I met a woman who needs psychiatric care, but she's in a vulnerable situation." "Where is she?" "Living on the streets, under an overpass downtown." "I see. What's her condition like?" Richard described Sharon's behavior as best he could. Dr. Mark asked several questions and seemed genuinely interested in helping. "Richard, can I meet you there one of these days? I'd like to see her and do an initial evaluation." "Of course. When are you available?" "How about Thursday afternoon? I finish my hospital shift at 5. Richard was impressed by the doctor's willingness. "Doctor, how much does a consultation cost?" "In this case, nothing. It's part of my volunteer work." "Why?" "Because I believe everyone deserves medical care, regardless of their social status." Richard felt an immediate connection with Dr. Mark. He had finally found someone who shared his new worldview. On Thursday, Richard introduced Dr. Mark to Michael and then to Sharon. The doctor had a very careful and respectful approach. He sat on the floor beside Sharon, spoke in a soft and gentle voice, and didn't ask invasive questions. "Sharon, my name is Mark. I'm a doctor. I'm here because Richard and Michael are worried about you." Sharon looked at him suspiciously but didn't pull away. "You're not going to take me anywhere, are you?" "No, I just want to talk, if you'd like." "Bad doctor took me to a bad place once. I'm sorry that happened. I won't take you anywhere, unless you want to go." The conversation lasted over an hour. Dr. Mark managed to get Sharon to share a little of her story. She had been abandoned by her family when she developed schizophrenia in her youth. She spent years being forcibly medicated in poorly run psychiatric institutions. When she finally got out, she preferred living on the streets over the risk of being institutionalized again. "Sharon, would you like to try some medicine that could help you feel better?" Dr. Mark asked very carefully. "What kind of medicine?" "Medicine that will make the voices in your head quieter. That will help you sleep better at night." Sharon thought for a long moment. "If I don't like it, can I stop?" "You can, it's your choice. And you won't force me to go to the hospital?" "Never, only if you want to." Sharon agreed to try the medication. Dr. Mark explained it would take a few weeks to take effect, but he would come back every week to check on her progress. When they walked away from Sharon, Michael hugged both Richard and Dr. Mark. "Thank you. Now Aunt Sharon's going to get better," Dr. Mark smiled. "Michael, it'll take time, and she might not get completely better, but we'll try to help." "I know, but at least someone's looking after her now." Richard watched the interaction between Michael and Dr. Mark and realized he had found an important ally. But he also realized that every person they helped revealed how many more still needed help. "Dr. Mark, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why do you do this volunteer work?" "You have a private practice, you must earn well," as Dr. Mark smiled. "Because it reminds me why I became a doctor. In private practice, I treat wealthy people with wealthy problems. Anxiety because their kid didn't get into the most expensive college, depression because their husband is cheating with a younger woman. They're real problems, but..." He paused for a moment. "Here, I treat problems that really make a difference. Here, I can actually save lives." Richard understood exactly what Dr. Mark meant. It was exactly what he was feeling. At the company, he solved problems for wealthy clients who wanted to build even bigger, more luxurious buildings. Here, he was helping people regain their dignity and hope. But Richard's responsibilities at the company kept growing. Thompson Builders was negotiating the biggest contract in its history, a luxury residential complex worth over $1 billion. Meetings multiplied, travel increased, and the pressure mounted. Richard tried to keep up with his routine visits to the overpass, but it was getting harder. Some days he arrived too late. Other days, he couldn't make it at all. Michael noticed the change. "Uncle Richard, are you okay?" "You seem worried." "I am, Michael. Work's been really busy. Do you want to stop coming here?" The boy's direct question caught Richard off guard. "No, of course I don't want to stop." "Then why does it seem like you don't want to be here?" Richard sat beside Michael, feeling the weight of his words. "It's not that I don't want to be here, it's hard to do everything at once." "What's more important, your work or this?" "Michael, it's not that simple. My work supports. My family pays the salaries of hundreds of employees. But what makes you happier?" Once again, Michael's brutal simplicity left Richard speechless. What truly made him happier? Closing $1 million deal or seeing the grateful smile on Mrs. Gladys's face? "This makes me happier," Richard admitted. "But I can't just abandon my responsibilities." Nobody said abandon, but maybe there's a way to do both better. "How so?" "I don't know, you're the adult, but there's always a way when you really want something." Michael was right, as usual. Richard needed to find a way to balance his two lives. But that would mean making significant changes to how he ran his business. That night, Richard had a long conversation with Catherine. "Catherine, I need to tell you something. I'm thinking about making some changes at the company." "What kind of changes?" "I want to delegate more responsibilities to my team. I want more time to dedicate to social work." Catherine looked at him with concern. "Richard, are you talking about stepping back from the business?" "No, I'm talking about balancing my life better." "But Richard, the company is our life. It's what we've built together all these years." "The company is important, but it can't be the only important thing." "And what about our plans? The beach house we wanted to buy, the trip to Europe?" Richard realized he and Catherine had very different priorities. For her, financial success was the ultimate goal. For him, it had become just a means. "Catherine, we won't go broke. We'll still have a comfortable life. It just won't be the only focus anymore." "Richard, I'm afraid you're doing something you'll regret later. And I'm afraid I'll regret it if I don't." The conversation resolved nothing but made it clear that Richard and Catherine were heading in different directions. It was something they'd have to work through over time, just like all the other changes in his life. The next day, Richard made an important decision. He called his directors to a meeting and announced he was creating a new position, Chief Operating Officer. someone who would take on much of the day-to-day responsibilities, allowing Richard to focus on strategic vision and special projects. "Mr. Richard, may I ask what's motivating this change?" the financial director asked. "I want more time to dedicate to projects I consider important." "What kind of projects?" "Social projects, corporate responsibility initiatives." There was murmuring among the directors. This kind of language wasn't common in Thompson Builders meetings. "Sir, does this have to do with hiring?" "Robert?" asked Anthony from HR. "It does. Robert was the first step. But I want to expand our social involvement." "What kind of involvement?" Richard took a deep breath. This was the first time he'd speak openly about his plans for the company. "I want to create a hiring program for people in vulnerable situations, partnerships with organizations that work with the homeless. I want our company to be known not just for building structures, but for building opportunities." The room fell completely silent. Richard could see expressions of surprise, confusion, and concern on his directors' faces. "Mr. Richard," the commercial director said, "this could affect our image with some clients. The luxury market is very conservative. Then maybe it's time we expanded into other markets." "But sir, our focus has always been high-end construction. That's where our expertise lies, and we'll continue doing that. But we can also work on affordable housing, social interest projects." The objections multiplied. Each director had a different concern: costs, image, competition, logistics. Richard listened patiently but held his ground. "Gentlemen, I'm not asking for opinions. I'm informing you of a decision. We'll implement these changes gradually, but we will implement them." After the meeting, Richard went straight to the overpass. He needed to see Michael, to reconnect with the reason behind all these changes. He found the boy handing out food as usual, but there was something different in his demeanor. Michael seemed worried, constantly looking over his shoulder. "Michael, what's going on?" "Uncle Richard, I'm so glad you're here. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Some guys showed up yesterday. They said they don't want homeless people in this area anymore, that they'll call the city to kick everyone out." Richard felt anger rising. "What guys?" "I don't know. Men in suits like you, but they weren't nice like you." Richard understood what was happening, probably local business owners who wanted to clean up the area. It was a common issue. People saw the homeless as eyesores hurting their businesses. What exactly did they say? That this place is going to be revitalized, that there won't be room for bums anymore. Michael made air quotes, repeating the word that had clearly hurt him. Richard looked at the people under the bridge. Mrs. Gladys, Robert, who had found work but still slept there some nights, Sharon, Frank, and several others. They weren't bums, they were people who needed help. "Michael, do you know who these men were? What company?" "I don't know, but they left a card with Grandma Gladys." Richard went to speak with Mrs. Gladys, who showed him an elegant business card. It was from Renew NYC, an urban development company. Richard knew them. They were aggressive with their gentrification projects. "Mrs. Gladys, did they say when they'd be back?" "They said they'd return in a week with city officials, that we had that long to move out." "And where? Would you go?" She shook her head sadly. "We don't know, son. We were fine here. Nobody was bothering anyone." Richard felt determination growing inside him. He wouldn't let these people be thrown out like trash. Not after learning their stories, their dreams, their struggles. "Mrs. Gladys, don't worry, I'll handle this." "How, dear?" "I don't know yet, but I will." Michael stepped closer to Richard. "Uncle Richard, can you really help?" "I'll make it happen, I promise." But when Richard left the overpass that night, he had no idea how to keep his promise. Renew NYC was a powerful company with major political connections, and despite his wealth, he had no experience dealing with social issues on an institutional scale. It was time to learn fast. The next morning, Richard called Dr. Mark. "Doctor, I need a favor. Do you know any lawyers who work with homeless rights?" "I do. Why?" Richard explained the situation. Dr. Mark was outraged. "Richard, this happens all the time. It's a clear violation of human rights, but these people usually can't defend themselves." "Now they can. How can I help?" "Well, there are a few organizations that handle this. I can introduce you to attorney Sarah Johnson. She's a lawyer who works on social rights." "Perfect. Can you set up a meeting for today?" Today? Richard, are you always in such a hurry? When it's about Michael and the people under the overpass, yes, Dr. Mark laughed. Understood. I'll call her right now. 2 hours later, Richard was in attorney Sarah Johnson's office, a modest but organized space in the heart of the city. Sarah was a woman around 40 with intense energy and eyes that sparkled when she spoke about social justice. Richard, Dr. Mark told me about your situation. Unfortunately, it's all too common. Is there any legal way to stop this eviction? There is. Homeless individuals have constitutional rights. They can't be removed arbitrarily, especially without housing alternatives. But can they still do it? They can if no one opposes them. The usual process is private companies pressure the city gives in, residents are removed for their own good, and the area is revitalized to benefit businesses. And how can we oppose it? Several ways. We can file for an injunction, apply political pressure, mobilize the media. How much will this cost? Sarah smiled. Richard, Dr. Mark mentioned you're a businessman. Can I ask you a direct question? Of course. Why do you care so much about these people? No offense, but it's rare to find business owners willing to fight for the homeless. Richard thought about the question. Why did he care? What had changed so much in his life these past few weeks? I met a 9-year-old boy who taught me that helping people isn't about money, it's about character. Sarah studied him for a moment. That boy sounds very special. He is very special. Richard, I'll help you, and I won't charge a thing. Cases like this are exactly why I became a lawyer. Thank you. What do we need to do? First, we document everything. How many people live there? How long they've been there? What kind of threats they've received? Then we file for an injunction. How long will that take? If all goes well, we could get a restraining order in 2 or 3 days. And if it doesn't, then we'll have to try other strategies. Richard left Sarah's office with more hope, but also aware he was stepping into entirely new territory. This wasn't just about handing out food and talking to people anymore. Now he was challenging the system, questioning power structures. It was exactly the kind of fight Michael faced every day, just on a larger scale. That afternoon, Richard returned to the Broadway overpass with Sarah to document the situation. The attorney spoke to each resident, wrote down their stories, photographed the area, and collected the Renew NYC business card. Richard, there are 15 people here. Some have lived here for over 2 years. Technically, this is their established residence protected by law. Is that enough to win in court? It should be, but you know how it is. Sometimes justice is influenced by political and economic pressures. Michael watched the whole process with interest. To him, it was fascinating to see adults working together to solve a problem. Uncle Richard, is this lady your friend too? Yes, Michael. She's a lawyer. She's going to help us stop them from evicting you. And can she do it? She'll try. We'll all try. What if it doesn't work? Richard crouched to meet the boy's eye level. Michael, remember what you told me about doing the right thing? I remember. Sometimes doing the right thing means fighting, even when we're not sure we'll win. Michael nodded solemnly. I get it. Like when I disobeyed my mom to keep helping you guys. Exactly. So we're gonna fight? We're gonna fight. Michael smiled and held out his small hand. Richard shook it, feeling once again that he was making a pact that would change his life. Sarah filed for the injunction on Friday. Over the weekend, Richard waited anxiously, unsure if the restraining order would be granted. On Monday morning, she called with good news. Richard, we did it. The judge granted the injunction. Renew NYC is prohibited from removing the residents until a complete social study is conducted. Does that mean they're safe? For now, yes, but Renew NYC can appeal, and they might try other strategies. What kind of strategies? Political pressure, changes to city legislation, lobbying. The mayor's office. Richard realized he had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Companies like Renew NYC didn't give up easily when there was a lot of money at stake. When Richard arrived at the overpass with the news, he was welcomed as a hero. Mrs. Gladys cried with relief. Robert hugged him. Sharon smiled, a rare sight for her. But it was Michael's reaction that moved him the most. Uncle Richard, you're the best friend we've ever had. Why, Michael? Because you fought for us. No one ever fought for us before. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. In all his years of business success, he had never received a compliment that meant as much as that one. But the joy didn't last long. On Wednesday, Sarah called with troubling news. Richard, Renew NYC has filed an appeal, and worse, they have information about you. What kind of information? They know you own Thompson Builders. They're claiming a conflict of interest, saying you're getting involved to sabotage a competitor. Richard was stunned. Conflict of interest? What competitor? Apparently, you were both bidding on an urban revitalization contract. They're saying you're using the homeless as pawns in a business war. That's absurd. I didn't even know about that contract. I know, but they've convinced someone at City Hall. They're asking for you to be removed from the case. Richard felt anger rising inside him. How dare they twist his genuine concern for those people into a business maneuver? Sarah, what does this mean in practice? If their request is granted, you can't be legally involved in the case anymore, and without financial support, it'll be very hard to continue the defense. What if I voluntarily step back from the legal process but keep helping in other ways? That could be an option. But Richard, I have to warn you, they won't stop there. If you're really a threat to their plans, they'll come after you in other ways. What other ways? I don't know. But people with power and money get creative when they want to hurt someone. Richard ended the call with Sarah, feeling like he was stepping into a much bigger battle than he'd imagined. It wasn't just about protecting 15 homeless people. It was about power, about how society treated its most vulnerable members, and he was on the weaker side. That night, Richard talked at length with Catherine about the situation. Richard, don't you think you're getting into something bigger than you can handle? Maybe, but I can't back out now. Why not? You've already done more than anyone would. You got Robert a job, brought a doctor for Sharon. Because, Catherine, if I give up now, I'm sending Michael a message that some fights aren't worth it, and I can't do that. Richard, Michael is a child. He won't understand if you need to step back to protect your company, your family. He'll understand exactly what it means, that when things get tough, the rich abandon the poor. But Richard, you're not responsible for solving all the world's social problems. I'm not responsible for solving all of them, but I'm responsible for the ones right in front of me. The conversation ended unresolved, like so many others they'd had in recent weeks. Richard could feel Catherine pulling away from him, just as he was pulling away from the world they'd built together. It was painful, but it seemed inevitable. On Thursday, Richard had a surprise when he arrived at the office. Anthony from HR was waiting in his room with a serious expression. Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about Robert. What happened? Isn't he doing well at work? Quite the opposite. He's performing excellently. The problem is something else. What problem? Some employees are complaining. They say it's not fair to hire homeless people when there are so many qualified individuals unemployed. And what did you tell them? I said Robert was hired on merit, like any other employee. But the complaints haven't stopped, and now some clients have raised concerns. Richard felt his stomach tighten. Which clients? Northern Star Group. They said they don't feel comfortable knowing we have street people involved in their projects. Northern Star Group said that. Not directly. Not. But they asked questions about our new hiring criteria, and they requested assurances that only qualified professionals would work on their projects. Richard fell silent for a moment, processing the information. Northern Star Group was one of his biggest clients. Losing the contract would be a significant blow to the company. Anthony, is Robert qualified or not? He's extremely qualified. Perhaps the best materials inspector we've ever had. Then what's the problem? The problem is perception, Mr. Thompson. People judge by appearances, by background. And should we be guided by people's perceptions or by the facts? Sir, with all due respect, sometimes perception matters more than facts. In the business world... Anthony, I'm not firing Robert, and I won't apologize for hiring him. If Northern Star Group has a problem with that, that's their issue. Mr. Thompson, they represent 15% of our annual revenue, And Robert represents something far more important than money. What would that be? Richard looked at Anthony, searching for words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. He represents the chance for us to be a company that does the right thing, not just the profitable thing. Anthony left the room clearly dissatisfied, and Richard was left alone with his thoughts. He was facing resistance on all fronts, from his family, the company, the legal world. Every attempt to do good created new problems. Was this what Michael faced every day? This constant pressure to give up doing what was right? Richard called Dr. Anderson. "Doctor, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Have you ever thought about giving up volunteer work when things get tough?" Dr. Anderson laughed. "Every week. Why?" "I'm facing a lot of resistance from every direction." "Richard, can I tell you something? When I started working with the homeless, I lost half my private clients. Some fellow doctors stopped referring patients to me. My wife worried about our financial security." "And how did you handle it?" "I remembered why I became a doctor. It wasn't to make money, it was to help people. The money came as a result, but it was never the main goal. And if you had to choose between private practice and social work, I've chosen many times. I always choose social work." "Why?" "Because at the end of life, no one remembers how many wealthy patients you treated, but you always remember the lives you truly changed." The conversation with Dr. Anderson gave Richard the strength to keep going. But it also confirmed that the challenges he was facing were real and lasting. The next day, Richard had a meeting that would change everything. He arrived at the office and found 3 men in suits waiting in reception. He recognized one of them. It was Gregory Reynolds, CEO of Renew NYC. "Richard Thompson? I'm Gregory Reynolds. Can we talk?" Richard led them to his office, curious to know what they wanted. "Richard, I'll be direct. We know about your involvement with the Broadway overpass issue. So what? We want to make you an offer, a good one for everyone." "I'm listening." "We're proposing a partnership. Your company joins ours in the neighborhood revitalization project. You get a share of a $2 billion development." Richard was stunned by the figure. $2 billion would be the biggest contract in his company's history. "What about the homeless?" "Oh, them. We found proper shelters for them. Everyone wins." "What kind of shelters?" "City shelters. Appropriate places for those kinds of people." Richard knew the city shelters. Overcrowded, unsafe, with strict rules that often kept people from working or keeping their belongings. They weren't solutions, just ways to hide the problem. "And if I refuse the offer?" Gregory smiled, but it was a cold smile. "Richard, you're a smart businessman. I'm sure you'll make the right decision." "And if my decision is no?" "That would be a shame. You've built a fine company, a solid reputation. It'd be sad to see that change." The threat was subtle, but clear. Richard felt anger rising inside him. "Gregory, are you threatening me?" No, we're offering an opportunity, one that won't come around twice." Richard stood up. "Gentlemen, thank you for stopping by, but I'm not interested." "Richard, think carefully. $2 billion, your company would double in size. My company doesn't need to grow at the expense of innocent people." "Richard," Gregory also stood, "I hope you reconsider, for your own good." After they left, Richard stood alone in the room, shaking with anger and adrenaline. He had just turned down the biggest financial opportunity of his life and made powerful enemies in the process. But when he thought of Michael, Mrs. Gladys, and Robert, he knew he'd made the right choice. That afternoon, Richard went to the overpass earlier than usual. He needed to see Michael, to remind himself why he was fighting. He found the boy helping Sharon organize her few belongings. Dr. Mark's medication was working, and she seemed more lucid and composed. "Hi, Uncle Richard," Michael called when he saw him. "Aunt Sharon is doing much better." Richard greeted Sharon, who did indeed seem more present and calm. "How are you feeling, Sharon?" "Better. The voices are still there, but quieter, and I can think more clearly." "That's wonderful." "Richard," Sharon said, using his name for the first time, "thank you for bringing the doctor. It's been so long since anyone cared for me." Richard felt his eyes well up. All the pressure, the threats, the problems, they were worth it for moments like this. "Michael, can I talk to you alone?" They stepped away from the group. Michael, things might get harder from here on out. Harder how? Some people might try to stop us, try to keep me from helping you all. Michael looked at him seriously. Uncle Richard, are you giving up? No, never, but I want you to know it could happen. Could what happen? I don't know. Trouble for me, trouble for my company. Michael thought for a moment. Uncle Richard, if helping us is causing you problems, maybe you should stop. The suggestion caught Richard off guard. What do you mean? We don't want you getting hurt because of us. Richard crouched to meet the boy's eyes. Michael, remember what you taught me about doing the right thing? I do. Well, that's what I'm doing. And when you're doing the right thing, the problems don't matter, Michael smiled. So we'll keep fighting together? We'll keep fighting together. Until the end? Until the end. But Richard didn't know the end was coming much sooner than he imagined. The following Monday, Richard arrived at the office and found Jennifer waiting with a stack of newspapers on his desk. Mr. Richard, you need to see this. The headline of the city's largest business newspaper was devastating. Richard Thompson, from successful businessman to defender of bums. The article was a questionable piece that painted Richard as a businessman in crisis who had lost focus, harming his company and employees in favor of social adventures. It cited anonymous sources questioning his mental stability and leadership ability. Jennifer, who leaked this to the press? I don't know, sir, but it seems like someone with inside access to the company. Richard flipped through the other papers. All had similar stories, some even worse. One suggested he was under investigation for suspected money laundering through fake social organizations. It was a coordinated smear campaign. Richard knew exactly who was behind it. Gregory Reynolds and Renew NYC. They had made good on their threat. The phone didn't stop ringing all morning. Clients canceling contracts, suppliers demanding explanations, investors calling for urgent meetings. In just a few hours, Richard watched 20 years of reputation building crumble. At 2 in the afternoon, Catherine stormed into the office, furious. Richard, have you seen the papers? I have. And what are you going to do? I'll keep doing what I believe is right. Richard, they're destroying you, destroying us. And you still talk about continuing. Catherine, no, enough. Catherine was crying with anger. I've put up with your absences, your changes, you neglecting our family. But I won't stand by while you ruin our lives over beggars. The word beggars hit Richard like a slap. They're not beggars. They're people. Richard, I can't take it anymore. Either you stop this madness or I'm leaving. Catherine, you can't give me that ultimatum. I can, and I am. Choose your family or your bums. Richard looked at the woman he'd been married to for 15 years and realized they had become strangers. Catherine could only see the people under the overpass as threats to their financial security, and he could no longer see life solely through the lens of money. Catherine, I won't abandon these people. So you're choosing them. I'm choosing to do what's right. And to you that means losing your family. Richard fell silent. It was a question with no easy answer. Catherine took his silence as one. Fine, Richard. When you decide to come back to reality, call me. Until then, I'll be at my mother's. She slammed the door, leaving Richard alone in his ruined office. By evening, Richard went to the overpass as usual. But this time he carried the weight of everything he'd lost. Clients, reputation, family. Michael noticed immediately something was wrong. Uncle Richard, why are you sad? Richard sat on the ground beside the boy, too tired to pretend. Michael, sometimes doing the right thing costs too much. What happened? Richard told Michael about the papers, the clients who left, about Catherine. The boy listened quietly with a seriousness beyond his 9 years. Uncle Richard, do you regret meeting us? Never, Michael. Meeting you all was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even after losing so much? Richard looked around. He saw Mrs. Gladys talking to Robert about his job. He saw Sharon organizing her things with clarity. He saw Dr. Mark Anderson arriving for her weekly checkup. He saw people who had very little but cared for each other with genuine love. Michael, I didn't lose everything. I gained something much more important. What did you gain? I gained a real family. Michael smiled and hugged Richard. And we gained the best daddy in the world. The word daddy touched Richard's heart deeply. He and Catherine had never been able to have children, and that had been one of the great sorrows of his life. But there, in Michael's embrace, Richard felt something he had never felt before, the unconditional love of a child. Tears streamed down his face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of joy. "Michael, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Would you like me to be your friend forever? Really forever? Really forever? Even if other people get mad? Even if other people get mad?" Michael thought for a moment, with the seriousness of a child making an important decision. "Uncle Richard, if you stay with me forever, I promise to take care of you when you get old." Richard laughed through his tears. "It's a deal, Michael." They shook hands, sealing a pact that lasted until the end of the story. But Richard's troubles were far from over. On Tuesday, he discovered that 3 major clients had cancelled contracts, representing a loss of nearly $300 million. On Wednesday, his bank called him for an urgent meeting about loan renegotiation. On Thursday, the Business Bureau opened an investigation into the company's practices. Richard realized Gregory Reynolds was being very efficient in destroying his professional life. But he also noticed something interesting. Amid all this destruction, he felt more alive than he had in years. Every day he spent with Michael, and the people from the overpass reaffirmed his certainty that he was on the right path. On Friday, Richard made a radical decision. He called all the company's employees for a general meeting. When he arrived at the auditorium, he saw hundreds of worried faces. Everyone had read the news. Everyone knew about the company's troubles. "Everyone," Richard began, "you deserve to know the truth about what's happening." The auditorium fell completely, silent. "It's true our company is going through difficulties. We've lost important clients in recent weeks, and it's true this is related to my involvement in social work." A murmur spread through the crowd. "But I want you to understand why I'm doing this. A few months ago, I met people who changed my perspective on what truly matters in life. And I discovered that a company isn't just for making profit, it's for making the world better." Richard saw skepticism on many faces. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs, and you have every right to be. I won't lie. The next few months will be tough, but I also want you to know I won't give up. We'll fight to keep our company alive, and we'll do it without abandoning our values." An employee raised her hand. "Mr. Richard, what are those values?" "The value that all people deserve dignity. The value that financial success can't be built on others' suffering. The value that a company should be judged not just by the money it makes, but by the good it does." Another employee spoke up. "And if this means the end of the company?" Richard took a deep breath. "If it means the end of the company, at least we'll have ended doing the right thing." The meeting ended without applause, but also without hostility. Richard felt he had planted seeds of reflection in his team. Some might not understand, others might disagree, but at least they had heard his side of the story. That afternoon, when Richard arrived at the overpass, he found a surprise. Robert was there, even though it was a workday. "Robert, what are you doing here? Weren't you supposed to be at the construction site?" "I was, Richard, but I got fired." Richard felt his stomach drop. "Fired? Why?" "Anthony said it was a restructuring, that my position was eliminated. But I know the truth." "What truth?" "They fired me because they found out I've been coming here on weekends. They found out I'm still friends with you all, and that's not appropriate for the company's image." Richard felt a surge of anger. Anthony had fired Robert behind his back, using the company's situation as an excuse. "Robert, I'll fix this. I'll talk to Anthony." "No, Richard, let it go. I understand you're going through your own problems. I don't want to be another burden." "Robert, you're not a burden. You're one of the best workers we've ever had." "Was. Now I'm just another homeless man." The resignation in Robert's voice broke Richard's heart. The man had proven his worth, had regained his dignity through work, and now he was back at square one. "Robert, I promise I'll figure this out." "Richard, you've already done so much for me, more than I deserved. At least now I know I can. Still work. No one can take that from me. Michael, who had been listening, stepped closer and took Robert's hand. Uncle Robert, you'll always have a place here with us. Thank you, Michael. You all are my real family. Richard watched the exchange between Robert and Michael and made a decision. If Thompson Builders didn't want employees like Robert, maybe it was time to create a company that did. That night, Richard called Sarah. Sarah, how much would it cost to start a new company? What kind of company? A construction company, but a different kind. One that hires people in vulnerable situations and takes on socially meaningful projects. Richard, are you serious? Completely serious. Thompson Builders might not survive the attacks it's facing, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up. It'd be a small company, at least at first. Do you have the resources to fund it? Richard thought about his finances. With the loss of clients, the company was struggling with cash flow, but he still had personal savings, investments, properties. I have the resources. The question is, will you help me make this happen? Richard, it'd be an honor. Great. Let's start tomorrow. On Saturday morning, Richard returned to the overpass with a proposal for Robert. Robert, how would you like to be a partner in a construction company? Robert looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. What do you mean, Richard? I'm starting a new company, one that hires people like you, and I want you to be my first partner. Richard, are you serious? I've never been more serious in my life. You know construction better than many people with degrees, and you understand the value of honest work. You're exactly the kind of person I want as a partner. Robert began to cry. Richard, I don't have money to invest. You have something more valuable than money. You have experience and character. Michael, who was listening, jumped with joy. Uncle Robert is going to be a businessman. We'll be businessmen together, Michael. Me, Robert, and all of you who want to be part of it. What do you mean? Asked Mrs. Gladys. I want to create a company that's like a family, where everyone looks out for each other, where profit matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. Dr. Mark, who had arrived for Sharon's weekly checkup, listened with interest. Richard, are you thinking of a social cooperative? Something like that, a company that operates differently. It's an interesting idea and very brave. Dr. Mark, would you like to be part of it, overseeing occupational health? Dr. Mark smiled. Richard, you're starting a movement, and I would love to be a part of it. Richard looked around. He saw the people who had become his true family. He saw the possibility of creating something entirely new, something that could change not only their lives, but perhaps inspire others. Then it's decided. We'll create Solidarity Builders. Michael applauded, followed by everyone else. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt genuine hope for the future. But Gregory Reynolds hadn't given up. On Monday, Richard learned that Renew NYC had secured a new court ruling, suspending the injunction protecting the residents of the overpass. The removal was scheduled for Wednesday. Sarah called in desperation. Richard, they got a different judge. They claimed a public health emergency. Is that even possible? Unfortunately, yes, and now we only have 2 days to reverse this. What can we do? File an appeal, but there might not be enough time. Richard, I think it's time to consider other strategies. What strategies? Social mobilization, media, political pressure. Richard thought quickly. He no longer had political influence, his reputation was ruined, and he had no resources for a media campaign. Sarah, I can't apply political or media pressure, but I have an idea. What idea? What if we make sure the residents are no longer homeless by the time the removal order is executed? What do you mean? What if they have jobs and formal housing by Wednesday? Richard, that's impossible. There are 15 people and you have 2 days. I have a new company that needs workers, and I have contacts who can help with temporary housing. Richard, are you serious? Sarah, sometimes the only way to beat the system is to stop playing their game. Richard hung up and immediately called every contact he still had in construction, suppliers, subcontractors, industry acquaintances. He offered temporary work to every person at the overpass who was willing. It wasn't easy. Many refused to help. Others demanded high fees and some simply hung up. But Richard persisted, calling in every favor he'd accumulated over 20 years in the business. By Tuesday night, he had secured temporary jobs for 12 of the 15 people, for the other 3, including Sharon, who wasn't yet fit. To work, he arranged spots at a private shelter he knew. On Wednesday morning, when the officers arrived at the overpass to carry out the removal order, they found the place empty. Only a sign remained. "The people who lived here have found jobs and dignified housing. Thank you for your concern." Richard was hidden behind a pillar, watching the confusion of the officers and Renew NYC representatives. Gregory Reynolds was there in person, and his look of frustration made all the effort worthwhile. Michael appeared beside Richard. "We did it, Uncle Richard." "We did, Michael. What happens now?" Richard looked at the boy who had changed his life. "Now, we work together to build something better. Forever. Forever." But the story wasn't over yet. The following months were filled with hard work and challenges. Solidarity Builders started small, with simple projects and little money. Richard had to sell personal properties to keep the company running. Thompson Builders, his original company, went bankrupt 6 months later, a victim of the smear campaign and lost clients. It was painful to watch 20 years of work destroyed, but Richard realized he could live with that loss. What he couldn't live with was losing Catherine. His wife held firm in her decision to separate, and the divorce was finalized by year's end. It was a painful but amicable process. Catherine kept half the assets, which were considerable even after the losses. "Richard," she said on the day they signed the papers, "I hope you find happiness, truly." "Thank you, Catherine. You deserve happiness too." "Do you think you made the right choice?" Richard thought about the question. "I made the only choice I could live with. And are you happy?" "I am. For the first time in a long while, I am." Catherine smiled sadly. "I couldn't understand it back then, but now I see. You found something I could never give you." "What?" "A purpose that goes beyond the two of us." They hugged for the last time as husband and wife, and Richard felt grateful they had managed to part with mutual respect. Solidarity Builders grew slowly but steadily. Robert became a valuable and respected partner. Dr. Mark developed an innovative occupational health program. Sharon, with continued treatment, was able to work part-time in administration. Mrs. Gladys, even at 67, took charge of the social integration department, helping new employees from difficult backgrounds adjust to the work environment. And Michael kept distributing food on the streets, but now as part of an official company program. All employees were encouraged to participate in social work, and the company allocated a percentage of profits to community projects. 2 years later, Solidarity Builders had become a benchmark for sustainable construction and social responsibility. They won several awards, were featured in industry magazines, and began receiving consultation requests from other companies wanting to implement similar models. Richard was in his new office, much smaller than the old one but far more welcoming, when Jennifer, who had chosen to follow him to the new company, announced an unexpected visitor. "Mr. Richard, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's from Renew NYC." Richard tensed. He hadn't forgotten what Gregory Reynolds had done. "Send him in." To his surprise, it wasn't Gregory who entered, but a younger man he didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Frederick Davis. I'm the new CEO of Renew NYC. What happened to Gregory Reynolds?" "He was removed by the board after a series of irregularities in his business practices." Richard was curious. "What kind of irregularities?" "I'd rather not go into details, but let's just say his way of convincing people to accept proposals wasn't very ethical." Richard smiled. Sometimes justice found its own way. "And what do you want from me, Frederick?" "I'd like to propose a partnership, a real one this time. Renew NYC wants to learn from the Solidarity Builders model." "Why?" "Because we've discovered that doing the right thing can also be profitable. Your projects have lower employee turnover, higher customer satisfaction, fewer labor disputes. and the company's positive image has attracted socially conscious investors. Richard was intrigued. What kind of partnership are you proposing? We'd like you to consult with us on implementing responsible social practices, and we'd like to collaborate on some joint affordable housing projects. What about the overpass? That area you wanted so badly. Frederick smiled sheepishly. We abandoned the project. We found too many irregularities in the initial approval. Richard considered the offer. It was a chance to expand Solidarity Builders' social impact, but it also meant working with the company that had tried to destroy him. Frederick, can I give you an answer in a few days? Of course, but may I ask why the hesitation? Because I need to consult my team, especially the people who were hurt by your company's actions. I understand and I respect that. That afternoon, Richard went to the spot where he usually met Michael. The boy now attended a private school. Richard had insisted on paying, but he still dedicated his afternoons to social work. Michael, I need your opinion on something. Richard told him about the proposal from Renew NYC. Michael listened carefully, asking smart questions about the details. Uncle Richard, do you trust this Frederick? I'm not sure yet. He seems different from Gregory, but a company isn't just one person, right? Richard was impressed once again by Michael's insight. Exactly. A company is made up of many people. So maybe we can teach those people to be better. How so? If we work with them, we can show them how good it feels to do the right thing. Then they'll want to do more. And if they don't want to learn? Michael shrugged. Then we stop working with them. But at least we tried. Richard smiled. At 11 years old, Michael had developed a practical wisdom many adults lacked. Michael, do you think I should accept? I think you should talk to everyone and then decide together. That way, no one's left out. That's what we'll. At the company meeting the following week, Richard presented the proposal to all the employees. The discussion was long and intense. Some were against it, fearing the partnership would compromise the company's values. Others were in favor, seeing an opportunity to expand their social impact. It was Robert who gave the decisive opinion. Everyone, when I was homeless, a lot of people walked past me like I didn't exist. But Richard stopped and saw me as a person. Maybe it's our turn to stop and see if this company really wants to change. The vote was close, but the partnership was approved by a margin of 2 votes. The partnership with Renew NYC began with a pilot project, a low-income housing complex to be built using Solidarity Builders methods. It would be a test to see if the 2 companies could work together. The first few months were tough. There were clashes in corporate culture, disagreements over methods, and resistance from some Renew NYC employees. But Frederick was genuinely committed to change, and that made a difference. The project was a success. The families who received the homes were extremely satisfied, the construction quality was higher than usual for low-income housing, and costs stayed within budget. Most importantly, during the project, several Renew NYC employees began getting involved in social work. Some started joining food distribution activities, others volunteered to teach vocational courses for vulnerable people. Richard realized Michael was right. It was possible to teach people to be better. All it took was leading by example and being patient. 3 years after first meeting Michael, Richard was preparing a speech for an event on corporate social responsibility. It would be the largest event of its kind in the country, with hundreds of business leaders and officials in attendance. Michael, now 12, was helping Richard review the speech. Uncle Richard, are you going to tell them how we met? I am. It's the most important part of the story. Are you going to say I was a poor boy who taught you about generosity? Richard stopped writing and looked at Michael. Why do you ask? Because that's not really how it was, right? You didn't meet me because I was poor. You met me because you were looking for something. What thing? A way to be. Truly happy. Richard was struck by the boy's insight. You're right, Michael. I was lost and you all found me. So tell the story right. Say you didn't help us out of pity. Say we helped each other. That's exactly what I'll do. On the day of the event, the auditorium was packed. Richard stepped onto the stage and looked at the audience. He saw business people, politicians, journalists. In the back, in a space reserved especially for them, he saw Michael, Mrs. Gladys, Robert, Dr. Mark Anderson, Sharon, Sarah, and all the others who had become his true family. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, "I want to tell you about the day my life changed forever. It wasn't the day I closed my first $1 million deal. It wasn't the day my company reached $1 billion in revenue. It was the day a 9-year-old boy taught me I was asking the wrong questions." Richard told the whole story. He spoke about Michael and his pure generosity. He spoke about Mrs. Gladys and her dignity. He spoke about Robert and his resilience. He spoke about Dr. Mark Anderson and his dedication. He spoke about all the people who had shown him that true success isn't measured in money. "For a long time," Richard continued, "I believed my role in the world was to generate profit. Then I discovered my role is to generate value. And value isn't just financial. Value is the dignity we restore to an unemployed person. Value is the medical care we provide for those who can't afford it. Value is the opportunity we give someone to rebuild their life." The auditorium was completely silent. "Today, our company isn't the biggest in revenue, but it's the company I'm most proud to work for, because it's a company where every employee knows their work has a greater purpose, where every project contributes to a fairer world, where every day is a chance to make a difference." Richard looked directly at Michael, and all of this started because a brave boy showed me that generosity isn't giving what's left over. Generosity is giving what's needed, even when it means sacrifice. When Richard finished his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause, but the applause that meant the most to him came from the back of the room, where Michael stood, clapping with tears in his eyes. After the event, several companies approached Richard, asking for consulting to implement similar models. Universities invited him to give lectures. International organizations wanted to learn about the work of solidarity builders. But Richard always kept his focus on what truly mattered: the people. Every new employee hired, every family that received a decent home, every person who rebuilt their life through work. Michael grew up and became a brilliant, engaged young man. He chose to study business administration with a focus on social responsibility. His dream was to expand the Solidarity Builders model to other sectors of the economy. Mrs. Gladys became a respected figure in the company and the community. At 70, she still worked part-time and devoted the rest of her time to helping others in vulnerable situations. Robert became operations director of Solidarity Builders and one of the most respected professionals in the construction industry. His story of overcoming adversity inspired hundreds of others. Dr. Mark Anderson expanded his work and created a network of healthcare professionals dedicated to serving vulnerable populations. His methodology was adopted by several public hospitals. Sharon fully managed her mental health condition and became an advocate for the rights of people with psychiatric issues. She gave talks on the importance of humane treatment. Sarah became one of the country's leading social rights attorneys, winning several important cases that set precedents for protecting vulnerable populations. And Richard discovered that true wealth wasn't in the numbers of his bank account, but in the number of lives he had managed to touch in a positive way. 5 years after that first meeting on the overpass, Richard was in his office when Jennifer announced a special visitor. "Mr. Richard, there's a lady here who wants to speak with you. She says she's Michael's mother." Richard was surprised. In all these years, he had never met Michael's mother. The boy had become so close that Richard sometimes forgot he had a biological family. A woman around 40 years old entered the room. She was thin, her hands calloused from hard work, but she smiled with a dignity Richard recognized immediately. It was where Michael had inherited his inner strength. "Mr. Richard, my name is Karen Wilson. I'm Michael's mother." "Mrs. Karen, what a pleasure to meet you. Please have a seat." Karen sat down, looking a little nervous. "Mr. Richard, I came here to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For everything you've done for my son, and for everything my son has been able to do because of you." Richard was confused. "Mrs. Karen, I think you have it the other way around. It was Michael who changed my life, not the opposite." Karen smiled. "Mr. Richard, can I tell you something Michael doesn't know?" "Of course. 5 years ago, when Michael started coming home talking about a wealthy man who was helping homeless people, I was very afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid it was some kind of scam, that someone was using my son for something bad. Rich people don't help poor people without wanting something in return. Richard understood Karen's concern. What made you change your mind? I spied on him. I followed Michael several times to the overpass. I saw you there, sitting on the ground, talking to people as if they were your family. I saw you getting soaked in the rain, dirtying your expensive clothes, not caring about appearances. And then I realized you weren't using my son. You were taking care of each other. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. Mrs. Karen, Michael is like a son to me. I know, and you are like a father to him, a father he never had and one I could never give him. Mrs. Karen, let me finish, please. Karen took a deep breath. Mr. Richard, I didn't just come here to thank you. I came to ask you something. What do you want to ask? Michael turns 16 next month. He really wants to go to college to work with you at the company, but I don't have the money for private school and he won't get into a public university with the education I can provide. Richard leaned forward. Mrs. Karen, I would be honored to pay for Michael's education. And not just college. He can attend the best prep school, study wherever he wants. Karen began to cry. Mr. Richard, that's so generous, but I can't pay you back. Mrs. Karen, you already have. You raised the most extraordinary boy I've ever known. There's no greater payment than that. Are you sure? Absolutely. But can I ask for one thing in return? Of course. Can I keep being part of your lives? Like real family? Karen smiled through her tears. Mr. Richard, you've been family for a long time. At that moment, Michael appeared at the office door. Mom, what are you doing here? Karen and Richard looked at each other and laughed. My son, Karen said, I came to get to know your godfather better. Michael looked confused. Godfather? Yeah, son, Richard is like your godfather, and godfathers are part of the family. Michael ran and hugged Richard and Karen at the same time. So now we're really family? We always were, Michael, Richard said. We just had to make it official. And that was how Richard gained not just a son of his heart, but a whole family. Karen became a constant presence in his life, a wise woman who helped him understand even better the value of simple things. Some years later, when Michael graduated with a degree in business administration and became a partner at Solidarity Builders, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey he had lived. He had started as a successful but empty businessman, focused only on profits and status. He had lost nearly everything, his company, his marriage, his reputation, in the process of transformation. But he had gained something infinitely more valuable, a true family, a real purpose, and the certainty that he was contributing to a better world. On Michael's graduation day, Richard sat in the audience beside Karen, Mrs. Gladys, Robert, Dr. Mark Anderson, Sharon, Sarah, and so many others who had become part of his life. When Michael walked onto the stage to receive his diploma, he dedicated his achievement to the man who taught me that true success is measured by the good we do for others. Richard cried as he never had before, not from sadness, but from a deep and complete happiness. After the ceremony, Richard and Michael walked across the university campus. Uncle Richard, can I ask you something? Of course, Michael. Do you regret anything? Richard thought for a moment. I regret that. It took me so long to find you all. And the company you lost, the money you spent, the marriage that ended. Michael, all of that led me to you. How could I regret the path that brought me the greatest happiness of my life? Michael smiled. You know what I admire most about you? What? That you had the courage to change. Many people stay stuck in lives that don't make them happy because they're afraid to change. And you, what are you afraid of? Of not making the difference you've made, of not helping people the way you do. Richard stopped walking and looked at Michael. Michael, you've already made more of a difference than you realize. You saved me when I was lost. You saved Robert when he had no hope. You saved Sharon when she had no one to care for her. You saved all of us. But I want to do more. I want our company to be an example for the whole world. I want to show that it's possible to be successful while doing good. And you will. I'm absolutely certain of it. How do you know? Because your heart is in the right place. And when the heart is in the right place, everything else finds its way. They kept walking, father and son, in spirit, planning the future of Solidarity Builders and dreaming of all the lives they could still touch. Years passed. Solidarity Builders became one of the most respected companies in the country, not just for its financial success, but above all for its social impact. Hundreds of people had regained their dignity through job opportunities. Thousands of families had received decent housing through the company's projects. Other businesses began adopting similar models, creating a national movement of corporate social responsibility. Michael became an internationally recognized speaker, spreading the company's philosophy to other countries. Richard, now 60, had become a grandfather in spirit to the children Michael had with his wife Emily, a social worker he met during one of the company's projects. The children grew up hearing stories about the grandfather who had changed his life to help others. One Sunday afternoon, Richard was at home with the whole family, Karen, Michael, Emily, and the grandchildren. They were preparing a party to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Solidarity Builders. "Grandpa Richard," said 5-year-old Clara, "is it true you were really rich before you met us?" Richard laughed. "I thought I was rich, Clara, but I realized I was wrong." "Why?" "Because real wealth isn't having a lot of money. Real wealth is having people you love and who love you back." "And now you're rich?" Richard looked around. He saw Karen in the kitchen, making brigadeiros and humming softly to herself. He saw Michael and Emily organizing decorations for the party, laughing at something one had said to the other. He saw Peter, his 3-year-old grandson, playing on the floor with toy cars. "Now I'm the richest man in the world, Clara." "Because you have a lot of money?" "No, because I have you." The party was a success. Everyone was there. Mrs. Gladys, now 75 but still active, Robert, who had gotten married and had 2 children, Dr. Mark and his wife, Sharon, who had become a respected community leader, Sarah, who continued fighting for social justice, and dozens of others who had been part of the journey. During the party, Michael asked for everyone's attention to give a speech. "Everyone, today we're celebrating 10 years of Solidarity Builders. But for me, we're celebrating something much bigger. We're celebrating proof that change is possible, that it's possible to make a difference, that it's possible to choose love over fear." He looked at Richard. "Uncle Richard, 10 years ago you told me I had taught you about generosity. Today, I want to say you taught me something even more important." "What was that?" "You taught me it's never too late to be the person you truly want to be." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears once again. At 60, he still got emotional as easily as the first day he met Michael. "Michael, can I say something to all of you?" "Of course." Richard stood up and looked at all the faces around him. People who had been strangers and became family. People who had lost everything and regained hope. People who had found in work and mutual love a reason to keep fighting. "When I met Michael 10 years ago, I was lost. I had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. You gave me something I didn't even know I was searching for, a place in the world where I truly belonged." Richard paused, looking especially at Michael. "Michael, you once asked me if I regretted anything. Today I have a different answer. I regret wasting 50 years of my life without realizing that true wealth was right in front of me, waiting for me to have the courage to see it." Everyone applauded, but Richard wasn't finished. "And now I want to announce a decision Michael and I have made together. Starting today, Solidarity Builders will open its first international branch. We're taking our model to other countries, so more people can have the opportunity you gave me." The news brought surprise and joy. Michael stepped closer to Richard. "Uncle Richard, does this mean we're traveling to other places?" "It means we're expanding our family to the whole world. But not everything would be as simple as Richard imagined." The Monday after the party, he received an unexpected call. "Richard Thompson, this is Henry Patterson from the Department of Social Development." "Hello, Dr. Patterson. How can I help you?" "Richard, we're preparing a national social inclusion program through employment. We'd like Solidarity Builders to be our pilot company. Richard was surprised. A national program would be an incredible opportunity to expand the company's impact. What kind of program? We want to replicate your model in every major city across the country. The government would provide resources and logistical support, and you'd provide the methodology and oversight. Sounds interesting, but may I ask why you chose our company? Richard, you have the best social reintegration results in the country. 95% of the people you hire remain employed after 2 years. That's an exceptional rate. Richard knew the numbers were good, but he hadn't realized they were so far above the national average. Dr. Henry, can I discuss this with my team and get back to you in a few days? Of course, but Richard, I need to be honest with you. There's political resistance to this program. Some sectors think it's too expensive, others think it's too idealistic. We need a pilot project that's absolutely successful to convince the skeptics. I understand. What's the timeline? 6 months to implement the pilot in 5 major cities. If it works, we expand nationally. After hanging up, Richard immediately called Michael. Michael, I need to talk to you about an opportunity. Can you come over now? Sure, I'm on my way. When Michael arrived, Richard explained the government's proposal. The young man was excited about the possibility, but also worried. Uncle, Richard, 5 cities in 6 months? That's really ambitious. It is, but if we succeed, we'll be able to help thousands of people. And if we don't? Richard thought about the question. If we don't, at least we'll have tried. It's not just that. If we fail, it could hurt everything we've built so far. People will say our model doesn't work on a large scale. Michael was right. It was a huge risk. If the project failed, it could destroy the credibility they'd built over 10 years. Michael, what do you think we should do? I think we should consult everyone. This decision affects the whole family. Richard smiled. Even at 21, Michael still had the wisdom to include everyone in major decisions. That evening, they organized a meeting at Richard's house with all the key people involved in the company. Karen made dinner for everyone, turning the business meeting into a family gathering. Mrs. Gladys, now considered the unofficial matriarch of the group, spoke first. Richard, can I ask a worried grandma's question? Of course, Mrs. Gladys. If we accept this proposal and it goes wrong, will we lose our company? No, the company is stable, but our reputation could be damaged. And if it works? If it works, we'll be able to help many more people, and we'll prove our model can work anywhere. Robert, now the operations director, asked the practical question. Richard, do we have enough staff to oversee 5 cities at once? No, we'd have to hire and train a much larger team, and we'd have to travel constantly. Dr. Mark raised another concern. What about the quality of service? How do we ensure the people hired in other cities receive the same care we provide here? It would be a challenge. We'd need to develop very clear protocols and conduct. Intensive training. Sharon, who rarely spoke in meetings, surprised everyone with her input. Everyone, can I say something? They all turned to her. When I was on the streets, sick and abandoned, you gave me a chance. If you hadn't taken the risk to help me, I might not be here today. She paused, emotional. Now there are thousands of people like I was waiting for a chance. Are we going to deny them what was given to us? Sharon's words deeply moved everyone. Karen spoke next. My children, ever since Michael was little, our family has always lived taking risks. The risk of not having food, not having a home, not having work. You taught me there's a difference between taking a risk out of fear and taking a risk out of hope. How so, Mom? Michael asked. When we take a risk out of fear, we're running away from something. When we take a risk out of hope, we're moving towards something. This project to me is a risk with hope. Sarah, who had arrived late due to an urgent case, caught the end of the conversation. Sorry I'm late. What are you all talking about? Richard quickly explained the government's proposal. Sarah grew thoughtful. Can I offer a legal perspective? She said. Government projects always carry political risks. A new administration means new priorities. You could be halfway through a project and suddenly lose funding. Does that mean you're against it? Asked Richard. Not necessarily, but it means you need to protect yourselves, demand clear contracts, guarantees, protective clauses. The discussion continued for another 2 hours. In the end, they reached a consensus. It was a risk worth taking, but carefully. Michael summarized the group's decision. "We'll accept, but with conditions. We want to be involved in drafting the contract. We want full autonomy over the methodology, and we want guarantees of no political interference in the project." Richard was proud of Michael's maturity. "Agreed. I'll call Dr. Henry tomorrow." At the meeting with the government, Richard presented the group's conditions. Dr. Henry agreed to most points, but resisted some. Richard, full autonomy. "Here's complicated. We're using public funds, so there needs to be some government oversight. Dr. Henry, I understand the need for transparency, but our experience shows political interference harms results. We can accept financial audits, progress reports, but not interference in methodology. What if a politician wants to visit the project for photo ops?" Richard and Michael exchanged a glance. That was exactly the kind of thing that could derail their work. "Official visits only with prior scheduling and no disruption to activities," said Michael, "and no using the hires as political props." Negotiations lasted 3 weeks, but in the end, they reached an agreement that satisfied both sides. The project would be implemented in New York City, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Boston. Each city would aim to hire at least 100 people in socially vulnerable situations within 6 months. Richard knew this would be the company's biggest challenge yet, but he also knew that if it succeeded, it could change thousands of lives. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. The national project's implementation began immediately. Richard and Michael divided responsibilities. Richard would oversee New York City, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia, while Michael would handle New Orleans and Boston. It was the first time they'd work apart for long stretches, and both were nervous about the separation. "Uncle Richard, are you sure we can do this alone?" Michael asked the night before his first trip. "Michael, you're 21 and already wiser than most 50-year-old executives. I have no doubt you'll do great. But what if I make a bad decision? Then you learn from it and make a better one next time. That's how we grow." Michael smiled, but Richard could still see his uncertainty. "Michael, can I tell you a secret?" "Sure. When I met you 10 years ago, I was far more lost than you are now, and you at 9 years old helped me find my way. Now it's your turn to help others find theirs. Do you really think I can connect with people the way you do? I think you're even better at it. You grew up knowing what it's like to need help. That gives you an edge I never had." The first week went reasonably well. Richard secured partnerships in New York City and made progress in Los Angeles. Michael built a strong team in New Orleans and was optimistic about Boston. But by the second week, problems began to arise. Richard was in Philadelphia when he received an urgent call from Robert. "Richard, we have a problem here in New York City." "What kind of problem?" 3 of the new hires were arrested for drug possession. The local press is making a big deal out of it, saying our company hires criminals. Richard felt his stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of situation that could destroy the entire project. "Robert, do you know the details of what happened?" "I do. They were stopped by the police during a routine checkpoint. They found small amounts of marijuana. Nothing serious, but enough to give ammunition to our critics." "And how's the situation at the company?" "Tense. Some long-time employees are questioning our hiring policy, and some clients are calling for clarification." Richard realized this would be the first major crisis for the national project. How they handled it would determine its success or failure. "Robert, call an emergency meeting for tonight. I'm heading back to New York City now." "Richard, you're not losing faith in the project, are you?" "On the contrary, I'm learning that fighting for what's right sometimes means facing tough situations." When Richard arrived in New York City, he found the company under siege. Reporters at the door, nervous employees, some clients canceling meetings. It felt like going back to the worst moments of the crisis with Renew NYC 10 years earlier. But this time, Richard wasn't alone. He had an entire team that believed in the company's mission and was willing to fight for it. At the emergency meeting, Richard got straight to the point. Everyone, you know the situation. 3 employees were arrested for drug possession. The press is trying to turn this into a story about our company hiring criminals. How do you think we should respond? Mrs. Gladys spoke first. Richard, my dear, these people who were arrested are good people who made a mistake. They're not criminals, they're people trying to rebuild their lives. But Mrs. Gladys, how do we explain that to the press, to the clients? We tell the truth, said Michael, who had rushed back from New Orleans as soon as he heard about the crisis. We say our company hires people, not saints, and people make mistakes. Robert agreed. Michael's right. We can't pretend the people we hire are perfect. What we can do is show we're committed to helping them improve. Dr. Mark made a practical suggestion. What if we offer a mandatory counseling program for all employees? Not just those with a history of drug use, but everyone. A mental and physical wellness program. Sarah weighed in from a legal perspective. Legally, you're not responsible for what employees do outside work hours, but from an image standpoint, you need to show you're taking preventive measures. Karen, as always, brought the human perspective. My dears, do you remember when Michael was little and sometimes came home with dirty clothes because he'd been in a fight at school? I remember, said Richard. I didn't stop loving my son because he fought. I talked to him, taught him that fighting doesn't solve problems, but I kept loving him. That's how we treat family. Karen's words reminded everyone of the company's true philosophy. It wasn't about hiring perfect people. It was about creating a family where imperfect people could grow and improve. Richard made his decision. We'll hold a press conference tomorrow. We'll take full responsibility for our employees. We'll explain our philosophy. And we'll announce the wellness program Dr. Mark suggested. Richard, are you sure? Asked Robert. A press conference could backfire. Robert, if we run now, we'll spend the rest of our lives running. It's better to face the situation head on. The next morning, Richard was nervous. The press conference would be broadcast live across the country. The future of the national project depended on how he performed. Michael walked with him to the entrance of the auditorium where the conference would take place. Uncle Richard, are you nervous? I am. And you? Me too. But you know what calms me down? What? Remembering that we've always done the right thing, and when you do the right thing, even if it goes wrong, you can sleep in peace. Richard hugged Michael. Thank you for reminding me of that. The press conference began with aggressive questions from the journalists. Richard answered each one with honesty and transparency. Mr. Richard, does your company hire criminals? My company hires people. Some of those people have made mistakes in the past, but we believe in the human capacity for change and growth. But don't you think it's irresponsible to employ people with drug histories for important construction projects? I think it's irresponsible for a society to condemn people to eternal abandonment because of mistakes they've made. Our company offers opportunities for rebuilding, and our productivity and quality records prove that this works. And how do you ensure incidents like this won't happen again? I can't guarantee people won't make mistakes, but I can guarantee our company will be there to help them learn from those mistakes. Richard then announced the mental wellness program that Dr. Mark had suggested. Starting today, all Solidarity Builders employees will have free access to psychological counseling, addiction treatment, and personal development programs. Not because we're obligated, but because we believe investing in people is always the best strategy. A journalist asked the question Richard had been waiting. For Hatada, Mr. Richard, don't you think you're being naive? That you're spending money and energy on people who may never change? Richard took a deep breath before answering. 10 years ago, I was a businessman focused only on profits. If someone had told me back then that I'd completely change my life to help the homeless, I'd have said they were crazy. But I changed. And if I could change, anyone can. He paused and looked directly at the cameras. The question isn't whether these people deserve a second chance. The question is what kind of society we want to be. One that abandons people when they need help the most, or one that reaches out to those who are falling. The conference ended with a personal question. Mr. Richard, what's your message for the people watching? My message is simple. We're all capable of far more kindness than we realize. Sometimes it just takes the courage to try. In the days following the interview, Richard was surprised by the public's reaction. Instead of criticism, the company received hundreds of messages of support, people offering donations, volunteering, and businesses seeking partnerships. Michael was thrilled by the positive response. "Uncle Richard, did you see? People from all over the world are sending messages of support." "I did. I think we underestimated people's ability to understand our message." "You know what this means?" "What?" "It means there are far more good people in the world than bad. We just focused on the bad ones." Richard laughed. "Michael, at 21, you're already wiser than I am at 60. I learned from the best teacher." Paradoxically, the crisis of the employees' arrests ended up strengthening the national project. The mental wellness program became a model for other companies, and Richard's transparency won the trust of new partners. In the following weeks, the project advanced rapidly in all 5 cities. In New York City, they reached the goal of 100 hires in 4 months. In Los Angeles, they exceeded the target and reached 120 hires. Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Boston also showed solid progress. But it was in New Orleans that something extraordinary happened. Michael was supervising the activities when he met Anthony, a 45-year-old man who had lost his job and home due to alcohol addiction. Anthony had managed to overcome his addiction, but couldn't find work because of prejudice. "Michael, can I ask you something?" Anthony said after a few weeks working at the company. "Of course, Anthony. Why did you believe in me? Why did you give me a chance when no one else would?" Michael thought about the question. Anthony. 10 years ago, a very wealthy man believed in a 9-year-old boy handing out food on the street. "That man changed my life. Now it's my turn to change other people's lives. What if I let you down? Then you'll learn and try again. That's how it works." Anthony was moved. "Michael, I want to give back what you're doing for me." "How so?" "I have an idea. What if we, the employees hired by the project, started our own help program, like helping others who are in the same situation we were in?" Anthony's idea excited Michael. They organized meetings with all the employees hired by the national project, and the response was unanimous. Everyone wanted to participate. That's how the Solidarity Network was born, a program where employees themselves became mentors for others in socially vulnerable situations. Each employee would guide, support, and help at least one person find a job. When Michael told Richard about the idea, the businessman was moved. "Michael, do you realize what's happened?" "What?" "You've created something that goes beyond our company. You've started a movement." "How so?" "Think about it. Now we have people who are helping others. It's an endless cycle of solidarity." The Solidarity Network quickly spread to the other cities in the project. Within months, over 500 people were being mentored by employees of Solidarity Builders. Dr. Henry from the government was impressed by the results. "Richard, you've exceeded all expectations. Not only did you meet hiring targets, but you created something none of us had imagined." The Solidarity Network was Michael and Anthony's idea. I just supported it. "Richard, I need to tell you something. The President of the United States wants to see the project in person." Richard grew nervous. "Why?" "To consider an immediate nationwide expansion. Instead of waiting for the pilot period to end, he wants to implement the program in every state capital this year. It was an incredible opportunity, but also a huge challenge. Implementing the project in 27 state capitals at once would be far more complex than the current 5 cities. "Dr. Henry, can I discuss this with my team and get back to you?" "Of course, but Richard, I'll be honest, there's a lot of political pressure to move quickly. The president wants to announce the program before the elections." Richard understood the implication. If they agreed, they'd be stepping into electoral politics. If they refused, they might miss the chance to help thousands of people. That night, Richard held a video conference with the entire team across the country. The discussion was intense. "Everyone," Richard said, "the government wants to expand to all state capitals this year. It's an opportunity to help over 5,000 people, but it's also a huge risk for our company." Michael was the first to speak. Uncle Richard, what's our main goal? Protecting our company or helping as many people as possible? Helping as many people as possible. But if our company goes bankrupt, we won't be able to help anyone. Robert asked the practical question. How many people would we need to hire to oversee 27 cities? Richard had done the math. At least 200 people in supervisory roles. And we'd have to train them in no more than 3 months. Mrs. Gladys, joining the video call from Richard's home, made her observation. My children, when we started our company, we were 5 people trying to help 15 homeless individuals. Now you're talking about helping 5,000 people. Isn't that something to celebrate? Yes, Mrs. Gladys, but the question is whether we can do this without compromising quality. Karen asked a question no one had considered. Richard, if you don't take this on, will another company step in? Most likely, yes. And will that company care for people the way you do? Richard thought about the question. He knew some companies that might be chosen for the project. All of them were profit-driven, not people-focused. Probably not. Then the choice isn't between doing it well or not doing it. The choice is between doing it well or letting others do it poorly. Karen's words shifted the entire perspective of the discussion. Michael summed up the general feeling. Let's accept, but on our terms. And if the government tries to turn this into political propaganda, we walk away. Richard agreed. Deal. I'll call Dr. Henry tomorrow. The negotiations with the government were even more complex this time. Richard demanded full autonomy over hiring, methodology, and scheduling. The government wanted some political concessions Richard refused to make. Dr. Henry, we won't allow politicians to use our employees for campaign photos. We won't allow our units to be inaugurated with political grandstanding. And we won't allow the program to be interrupted if there's a change in administration. Richard, you're being too rigid. It's an election year. Some political maneuvering is natural. That's exactly why I'm being rigid. We don't want the people we're helping to be treated as propaganda props. The negotiations lasted over a month. In the end, Richard secured most of the guarantees he wanted. The program would be implemented in 27 major cities, with solidarity builders having full autonomy over technical aspects. But Richard knew managing a project of this scale would be the greatest challenge of his life. Implementation began immediately. Richard and Michael divided the country into regions and started traveling constantly to establish the new units. It was exhausting but also thrilling to see the impact they were making. In 3 months, Richard visited 15 cities. In each one, he encountered stories that moved him. In Miami, he met Mary Williams, a 50-year-old woman who had lost her job due to her age and managed to start over as a construction supervisor. In Chicago, he met Charles Edward, a 25-year-old who had overcome a crack addiction and become one of the team's best electricians. But it was in Seattle that Richard had his most profound experience. He was visiting a construction site when a worker approached him. "Mr. Richard, can I speak with you?" "Of course. What's your name?" "Franklin. I've been working here for 2 months. And how has the experience been?" Franklin began to cry. "Mr. Richard, 6 months ago I was living under a bridge, hopeless, ready to give up on life. Today I have a job, a home, and I'm helping build houses for other families." Richard was deeply moved. "Franklin, how did you hear about our program?" "It was through the Solidarity Network. A young man who works with you in New Orleans reached out to me when he was passing through Seattle. Said he knew someone who could help me." Richard was amazed. The Solidarity Network had spread beyond the boundaries of the official project and was functioning as an informal national mutual aid network. "Franklin, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you value most about working here?" Franklin thought for a moment. "Respect. No one treats me like trash. Everyone treats me like a person." Franklin's words reminded Richard of why they had started all this. It wasn't just about giving jobs. It was about restoring dignity. When Richard shared Franklin's story with Michael over the phone, the young man was moved. "Uncle Richard, do you realize what we're doing?" "What?" "We're creating a new way for people to relate to each other. A way based on respect and solidarity." Michael, sometimes I think you understand the impact of our work better than I do. That's because I grew up watching you do it. To me, treating people with dignity is normal, but for many it's revolutionary. After 6 months of implementation, the results of the national project were extraordinary. Over 3,000 people had been hired across the 27 state capitals. The Solidarity Network had grown organically and was helping more than 2,000 additional people. Dr. Henry scheduled a meeting to present the results to the President of the United States. Richard, the President, is very impressed with the numbers. He wants to award you a Medal of Social Merit. Richard was honored but cautious. Dr. Henry, will there be an official ceremony? Press. Yes. Why the concern? Because it's an election year. I don't want our medal to be seen as political endorsement. Richard, you're being paranoid. It's legitimate recognition for the work you've done. Richard consulted his team about accepting the medal. Opinions were divided. Some felt it was well-deserved recognition, while others feared it was a political trap. Michael cast the deciding vote. Uncle Richard, let's accept it, but let's make it clear that it's recognition for the people. We've hired, not us. The medal ceremony took place at the White House, attended by cabinet members, business leaders, and journalists. Richard decided to bring representatives from every state capital where the project was being implemented. When the president presented the medal, Richard gave a speech that surprised everyone. Mr. President, I accept this medal on behalf of all the people who had the courage to restart their lives. This medal isn't mine. It belongs to Franklin, who went from the streets of Seattle to becoming a home builder. It belongs to Mary Williams, who at 50 proved age is no barrier to contributing. It belongs to Anthony, who turned his own recovery into a mission to help others. Richard paused and looked directly at the cameras. This medal belongs to everyone who believes a society should be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members. And most of all, it belongs to the 9-year-old boy who taught me that true wealth lies in making a difference in others' lives. Michael, seated in the audience, wept with emotion. Mrs. Gladys, Karen, Robert, Dr. Mark, Sharon, Sarah, and everyone else who had been part of the journey were there to share the moment. After the ceremony, the president asked to speak privately with Richard. Richard, I'm impressed by your work. I'd like to offer you a position in the government, Secretary of Social Development. The offer caught Richard completely off guard. Mr. President, I'm honored, but think about it. As secretary, you could implement your ideas on a national scale, not just in specific projects. Richard thanked him and asked for time to consider, but he already knew his answer. That evening at the hotel, Richard discussed the offer with Michael. Uncle Richard, what are you going to say? I'm going to decline. Why? Because our work isn't political, it's human. If I become a minister, I become a politician. And politicians have to make compromises I'm not willing to make. Michael agreed. Besides, as a minister, you'd be stuck in Washington. You wouldn't be able to visit the construction sites, talk to the people. Exactly, and those conversations are what keep me connected to the purpose of our work. Richard called the president the next morning and respectfully declined the offer. The president was disappointed but understood his reasons. In the following months, the national project continued to grow. New companies began adopting similar methodologies. Universities created courses on corporate social responsibility based on the Solidarity Builders model. Michael, now 22, had become a national reference in social innovation. He received invitations to speak at international events and was offered a scholarship to study at the Wharton School of Business. Uncle Richard, I'm thinking about accepting the Wharton Scholarship, Michael said one day. Richard felt his heart tighten. The thought of being apart from Michael for 2 years was painful, but he also knew it would be a unique opportunity for the young man. Michael, it would be an incredible experience for you, but it would also mean being away from the company, away from family. Michael, remember what you told me about taking risks with hope? I do. Going to Wharton would be a risk with hope. You'd come back with knowledge that could take our work to an even higher level. Michael grew thoughtful. And the company? How would it manage without its 2 main partners? Richard smiled. Michael, our company doesn't depend on just the 2 of us. It depends on everyone. Robert, Mrs. Gladys, Dr. Mark, Karen, they're all capable of keeping the work going. Are you sure? Absolutely. In fact, maybe it's good for us to learn that we've built something bigger than ourselves. A few weeks later, Michael decided to accept the Wharton scholarship. The family organized a farewell party that was both sad and celebratory. Mrs. Gladys, now 77, gave an emotional speech. Michael, my grandson in spirit, when you were little, I could see you had something special. You took care of everyone as if they were family. Now you'll learn how to care for families all over the world, Karen cried throughout the party. My son, you'll be far away, but you'll always be in my heart. Richard spoke last. Michael, 13. Years ago, a 9-year-old boy taught me about generosity. Today, that boy has become a man ready to teach the world. I'm proud to have been part of your journey. Michael hugged Richard tightly. Uncle Richard, you weren't just part of my journey. You are my journey. Everything I am, I owe to you. Michael, that's not true. Everything you are, you already were when we met. I just helped you see it. At the airport during their goodbye, Michael made one last promise. Uncle Richard, I'll come back with ideas that will revolutionize our work, and I'll come back even more committed to our mission. I know you will, and I'll be here waiting. The next 2 years were different for Richard. Without Michael by his side, he had to learn to share responsibilities with the rest of the team. It was difficult at first, but it ultimately strengthened the entire organization. Robert took on a bigger role in operations. Mrs. Gladys became the main person responsible for integrating new employees. Dr. Mark expanded the mental wellness program to include employees' families. The company not only survived Michael's absence, it thrived. It opened branches in other Latin American countries and became a global benchmark for corporate social responsibility. Richard kept in constant contact with Michael through video calls. The young man was excelling at Wharton and developing research on social economics that was catching the attention of professors and classmates. Uncle Richard, I'm learning so much here, Michael said during one call. But what amazes me most is realizing our model is far more advanced than I ever imagined. How so? Here they're still debating theories about social responsibility that we've been putting into practice for over 10 years. We're pioneers and didn't even know it. Michael, is that good or bad? It's great. It means when I come back, I can systematize everything we do and create a methodology other organizations can replicate. During Michael's second year at Wharton, Richard received news that would change everything. Dr. Henry called urgently. Richard, I need to tell you something. There's an ongoing investigation into irregularities in the national project. Richard was alarmed. What kind of irregularities? Suspicions of overbilling, favoritism in bidding, contract steering? Dr. Henry, are you saying our company is under investigation? Not exactly. The investigation is about the public administration of the project, but since you're the main contractors, you might be called to testify. Richard felt his stomach drop. It was the last thing he expected to hear. Dr. Henry, we have all the documents, all the financial report. I know, Richard, and I completely trust your integrity, but you know how it is. In an election year, any government project becomes a target for political investigations. Richard understood. It was exactly what he'd feared when the project went national. Politics was interfering with social work. What do you advise me to do? Prepare all the documentation and be available to the authorities, and it might be wise to hire a lawyer, specializing in administrative law. Richard immediately called Sarah. Sarah, we need to talk urgently. What happened, Richard? Richard explained the situation. Sarah grew worried. Richard, these kinds of investigations can drag on for years, and even if you're cleared in the end, the damage to your reputation could be irreversible. What do you suggest? Let's prepare for the worst. Organize all the documentation, hire experts, and above all, maintain total transparency with the press. Richard decided not to tell Michael about the investigation. The young man was in the middle of final exams at Wharton, and Richard didn't want to disrupt his studies. But he kept the entire company team informed. The reaction was one of indignation and determination. "Richard," said Robert, "we know our company is clean. We have the best financial controls in the industry." "I know, Robert, but sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes appearances are more important than reality." Mrs. Gladys offered her usual wisdom. "Richard, dear, when you're doing the right thing, the truth always comes out." "It might take time, but it does." Karen was furious. "These politicians have nothing better to do. They attack the people actually doing the work." Dr. Mark was more pragmatic. "Richard, what's the worst-case scenario?" "Worst case? Being forced to return money we never took, losing government contracts, having our reputation destroyed. And the best case? Best case, our innocence is proven and we continue our work. Then let's work toward the best case and prepare for the worst." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the following weeks were tense. Richard spent most of his time with lawyers, organizing documents and preparing defenses. It felt like reliving the worst moments of the crisis with Renew NYC, only much worse. The press began speculating about irregularities in the national project. Some articles insinuated that Richard had taken advantage of his social entrepreneur image to secure favorable contracts. Richard was furious at the implications. "Sarah, how can they write these things without proof?" "Richard, you know how it works. In times of political crisis, everyone becomes a suspect, especially those close to the government. But we've never been politically connected. We've always kept our distance. That doesn't matter. You received government contracts, so you're a potential target." The first summons to testify arrived 2 weeks later. Richard would be questioned by the Government Accountability Office about the hiring procedures for the national project. The night before his testimony, Richard barely slept. He wasn't nervous because he had something to hide, but because of what the investigation could mean for all the people who depended on the company. The testimony lasted 6 hours. Richard answered hundreds of questions about contracts, methodologies, and financial reports. The auditors were thorough but respectful. "Mr. Thompson," the lead auditor said at the end, "based on the documentation provided, we found no evidence of irregularities in your company's operations." Richard felt immense relief. "Does this mean the investigation is over?" "For your company, yes, but the broader investigation into the project continues." Richard left the Government Accountability Office feeling relieved, but still concerned. If the general investigation continued, they could still be indirectly affected. That night, Richard finally called Michael to tell him about the investigation. "Uncle Richard, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted to protect your studies, and because I hoped it would blow over." "And now, what's the situation?" Richard explained his testimony and the positive outcome. Michael was relieved, but also worried. "Uncle Richard, could this affect our international expansion?" "It might. Some international partners have already reached out for clarification." "What kind of clarification?" "They want assurances there are no legal issues with our company." Michael grew thoughtful. "Uncle Richard, I think it's time for me to come back to the United States." "Michael, you still have 6 months left in your program." "Uncle Richard, my place is there, by your side, facing this together. I can finish my research here and defend my thesis remotely." Richard was moved by Michael's loyalty. "Michael, are you sure?" "Absolutely. Family doesn't abandon family in tough times." Michael returned to the United States 2 weeks later. Richard picked him up at the airport, and their embrace moved everyone present. "Michael, how are you?" "Good, eager to get back to work." "And you? How are you handling all this pressure?" "It's been hard, but having you back makes everything better." In the following days, Michael fully immersed himself in the situation. He reviewed all the documents, spoke with the lawyers, and studied the potential impacts. "Uncle Richard, can I make a suggestion?" "Of course." "I think we should be proactive. Instead of waiting for the investigation's outcome, let's take control of the narrative." "How so?" "Let's launch a full transparency campaign. Open our books for an independent audit. Invite the press to tour our facilities. Show the concrete impact of our work." Richard liked the idea. Michael, it's risky. If they find even the smallest irregularity. Uncle Richard, we know our company is clean. It's time to show the world. The transparency campaign launched the following month. Richard and Michael organized guided tours for journalists, independent auditors, and representatives of NGOs. They opened all contracts, all financial reports, all internal processes. The result was better than they expected. Several positive articles were published, highlighting not only the company's financial integrity, but especially the social impact of their work. An editorial in the country's leading business newspaper summed it up well. In times of widespread distrust in institutions, Solidarity Builders stands out as proof that it's possible to do business with ethics and transparency. The broader investigation into the national project continued for a few more months, but ultimately focused on other targets. Richard and Michael's company was officially cleared of any wrongdoing. Dr. Henry called Richard with the official news. Richard, you can rest easy. You're completely in the clear. In fact, your work is being cited as an example of good management. Dr. Henry, does that mean we can continue with government contracts? Not only can, but you should. The new administration will need reliable partners for social projects. Richard felt relieved, but also thoughtful. The investigation had shown how fragile a company's position could be when it relied too heavily on government contracts. Michael, I think we need to diversify our client base even more. We can't depend so much on the government. I agree, and I have some ideas about that. Michael had used his time at Wharton to study social business models from other countries. He brought back several proposals for expanding the company's work into the private sector. Uncle Richard, what if we offered our services to other companies that want to implement social responsibility programs? How so? Consulting, training, methodology development. Many companies want to do social work but don't know how. That's a good idea, but won't it compete with our main work? On the contrary, it'll amplify our impact. Instead of directly helping 1,000 people, we can teach 100 companies how to help 10 people each. Richard liked the logic. And how would we start? I already have. During the transparency campaign, several companies reached out asking for partnerships. We can begin with them. In the following months, Michael developed the company's consulting division. Soon they were working with businesses across various sectors, helping them implement social inclusion programs. Ironically, one of their first clients was Renew NYC. Frederick Davis, who had taken over the company years earlier, approached Richard personally. Richard, I know we have a complicated history, but I'd like to hire you to help us completely overhaul our corporate culture. Richard was surprised by the request. Frederick, why do you want to change? Because we've learned that doing the right thing is also good for business. Companies with social responsibility have more engaged employees, more loyal customers, and more confident investors. The partnership with Renew NYC became one of Richard's most rewarding projects. Seeing the company that had tried to destroy him a decade earlier transform into an organization focused on social impact confirmed that people and businesses really could change. By the end of the third year after Michael's return, Solidarity Builders had become something far greater than Richard had ever imagined. It was no longer just a construction company with a social conscience. It was a complete ecosystem of organizations dedicated to social transformation. Beyond the original company, they had created Solidarity University, which offered free professional training courses, the Research Institute for Social Innovation, which developed new methodologies for inclusion, the National Mentorship Network, which connected vulnerable individuals with volunteer mentors, the Social Investment Fund, which financed social entrepreneurship projects. Michael, now 25, had become one of the country's leading experts in social economics. He received invitations to speak at international events and was writing a book about the American model of inclusion through work. Richard, at 65, remained active, but had begun delegating more responsibilities to the new generation of leaders they had trained. One Friday afternoon, Richard was in his office when Jennifer announced a special visit. "Mr. Richard, there's a family here who wants to speak with you." Richard was curious. What family? They said their family of Franklin from Seattle. Richard remembered immediately. Franklin was the man he had found under the overpass in Seattle, who had become one of the company's most dedicated employees. Send them in. A woman around 40 entered the room, accompanied by 2 teenagers. Mr. Richard, my name is Lucy. I'm Franklin's wife. Lucy, what a pleasure to meet you. And these are your children? Yes, this is John Paul, 16, and this is Anna Beatrice, 14. Richard greeted the young ones, who seemed nervous. How can I help you? Mr. Richard, I came here to thank you. In person. Thank me for what? For saving my family. Richard didn't understand. Lucy, I didn't save your family. I just gave Franklin a job opportunity. Lucy began to cry. Mr. Richard, when Franklin was on the streets, our family was broken. I worked 16 hours a day to support the children. Couldn't give them a proper education, had no hope for the future. She wiped her tears before continuing. Today, Franklin has a dignified job that allows me to work less and take better care of our kids. John Paul is taking a technical course in construction. He dreams of working with you someday. Anna Beatrice is taking English classes, wants to go to college. Richard was moved. Lucy, that's your family's merit, your effort. No, Mr. Richard, it's yours and Michael's. You didn't just give Franklin a job, you gave him back his dignity. And when a man regains his dignity, the whole family changes. John Paul, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. Mr. Richard, can I tell you something? Of course. When my dad was on the streets, I was ashamed of him. I never told anyone at school he was my father. Today, I'm proud. My dad works at a company that helps people. He makes a difference in the world. The young man's words deeply touched Richard. He realized the impact of their work went far beyond those directly hired. It affected entire families, entire generations. John Paul, would you really like to work with us? It's my dream, Mr. Richard. Then I'll make you an offer. Finish your technical course and come intern with us. If you're as dedicated as your father, you'll have a brilliant career. The young man beamed. Anna Beatrice also lit up. Mr. Richard, can I work with you too when I grow up? Of course, especially if you go to college. We're always in need of qualified people. After Franklin's family left, Richard sat alone in his office, reflecting on the conversation. Moments like that confirmed he had made the right choices in life. Michael appeared at the office door. Uncle Richard, I saw a family leaving here. Everything okay? Richard told him about the visit from Franklin's family. Michael was moved by the story. Uncle Richard, do you realize how many lives we've changed without even knowing? Sometimes I get a sense of it. But conversations like this make me realize the impact is much greater than we imagined. You know what amazes me the most? What? That it all started with you stopping to talk to me in the rain. One small gesture that changed thousands of lives. Richard smiled. Michael, it wasn't a small gesture. It was the biggest gesture of my life. I just didn't know it at the time. And if you hadn't stopped? If you'd just driven past? Richard thought about the question. I think eventually life would have given me another opportunity. When you're ready for transformation, the universe conspires to make it happen. Do you think you were ready back then? I was ripe for change. I was unhappy with my life, even if I didn't admit it consciously. You were the catalyst I needed. Michael grew thoughtful. Uncle Richard, I've been thinking a lot about the future. What kind of thoughts? About how to expand our impact even further. About how to train the next generation of social leaders. And have you reached any conclusions? I have. I want to create a university dedicated solely to training leaders in social innovation. Richard was impressed by the ambition of the project. Michael, that would be enormous and expensive. It would, but think of the potential. Instead of training a few leaders occasionally, we'd train hundreds every year. People who would graduate with a clear mission to change the world. And how would it work? Undergraduate and graduate programs focused on social economics, NGO management, public policy, social entrepreneurship. But with one difference, every student would be required to work on real projects during their studies. Richard liked the idea. Like mandatory internships, more than that. Every student would have to create and implement a social project during their course. Graduation would be the project, not just theoretical study. It's a brilliant idea, Michael, but where would we get the resources for this? I have a few ideas. Partnerships with companies, government funding, support from international organizations. And most importantly, our own company could be the initial financial anchor. Richard grew excited at the possibility. Michael, if we can pull this off, it could be our greatest contribution to the world. Exactly. Instead of changing a few lives directly, we'll train people who will change millions of lives. In the following months, Michael dedicated himself entirely to the university project. He traveled to several countries studying similar models, spoke with education experts, developed curricula and sought partners. Richard fully supported the project, but also began thinking about his own transition. At 65, he felt it was time to prepare the next generation to take over the organizations he had built. At a family meeting, Richard announced his decision. Everyone, I want to share a decision I've made. At 70, I'll officially retire as president of the company. The news caused surprise and some concern. Richard, said Robert, you're still young and active. Why retire? Because I want to ensure a smooth transition for the next generation, and because I want time to focus more on the personal side of family life. Michael spoke up. Uncle Richard, does this mean you want me to take over as president? It means I want you and Robert to take over together. The two of you as co-presidents, Michael bringing the innovative vision, Robert bringing the operational experience. The proposal pleased everyone. Robert and Michael had known each other for over 10 years and worked very well together. Mrs. Gladys, now 79 years old, made her observation. Richard, my son, you're not retiring, you're just changing roles from president to grandfather of the family. Richard laughed. Exactly, Mrs. Gladys. That's what I want to be, the grandfather who tells stories and gives advice when asked. Karen was moved. Richard, thank you for preparing my son to be a leader. You've made him a better man than I ever dreamed. Karen, Michael was always extraordinary. I just helped him see it. Dr. Mark raised a practical question. Richard, how will the transition work? Will it be gradual? Yes, over the next 2 years I'll gradually pass on responsibilities. At 70 I'll officially step down, but I'll stay on as an advisor whenever needed. The transition began immediately. Richard gradually delegated responsibilities to Michael and Robert, while focusing more on long-term strategic planning. It was during this time that something happened to shift the family dynamic. Michael got married. His wife, Emily, was a social worker he'd met during a company project. She was a brilliant woman, dedicated to social work, and she fit perfectly into the extended family Richard had built. The wedding took place at the company headquarters, attended by hundreds of employees, former employees, partners, and friends. Richard was Michael's best man in a moment that moved everyone. Michael, Richard said in his speech, when I met you 15 years ago, you were a 9-year-old boy with a heart as big as the world. Today, you're a man with an even bigger heart. Emily, you're marrying the best man I know. Emily made sure to include Richard and Karen as official parents in the ceremony. Richard and Karen, you raised the extraordinary man I'm marrying. To me, you're my in-laws in every way that matters. 2 years later, Richard officially became a grandfather when Emily and Michael had their first child. The boy was named Richard Michael Wilson, a double tribute that left Richard deeply moved. Michael, you had to give him my name. Of course, he'll grow up knowing he's named after the best grandfather in the world. Richard held the baby in his arms and felt an emotion he'd never experienced before. It was as if his entire journey had led to this moment, holding the third generation of the family he'd stumbled upon on a bridge 15 years earlier. At 70, Richard officially retired as company president. The transition ceremony was an emotional event, attended by hundreds whose lives had been touched by the organization's work. Michael and Robert officially took over as co-presidents, while Richard became honorary chairman, serving in an advisory role. In his farewell speech, Richard spoke about the extraordinary journey he'd lived. 15 years ago, I was a successful but empty businessman, I had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. Today, at 70, I can say I'm the richest man in the world. Not because of money, but because I have all of you. He looked at every face in the crowd. Michael and Emily, Karen, Mrs. Gladys, Robert, Dr. Mark, Sharon, Sarah, and hundreds more who had become part of his extended family. This company isn't mine, it's ours. It belongs to everyone who believed it was possible to do business with heart, to everyone who proved that true success is measured by the good we do for others. Richard paused, looking especially at Michael. And most of all, this company belongs to a 9-year-old boy who taught me that real wealth lies in making a difference in people's lives. Michael, thank you for saving me when I didn't even know I needed saving. The ceremony ended with everyone on their feet, applauding not just Richard, but the entire journey they had shared. In the following years, Richard enjoyed retirement in a way he had never imagined possible. He spent his days watching his grandson grow, offering advice when asked, and most of all, witnessing how the work he had helped create continued to expand and touch lives. The University of Social Innovation, Michael's project, was inaugurated 3 years after Richard's retirement. The institution quickly became a global benchmark, attracting students from various countries. Solidarity Builders expanded to 15 nations and became a case study in business schools worldwide. The American model of social inclusion through work was replicated in dozens of countries. The Solidarity Network grew into a global movement, connecting vulnerable individuals with volunteer mentors in over 50 countries. At 75, Richard received an unexpected call. Richard Thompson, this is Sven Lindbergh from the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. Richard thought it was a prank. How can I help you? Mr. Thompson, I'm calling to inform you that you and Michael Wilson have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for your work in social inclusion and reducing inequality. Richard was speechless. Mr. Lindbergh, are you sure there's no mistake? No mistake, your work was nominated by over 100 international organizations. The ceremony will be held in Oslo this December. When Richard shared the news with his family, their reaction was disbelief followed by overwhelming joy. Michael was emotional. Uncle Richard, can you believe it? That 9-year-old boy you met in the rain is going to receive the Nobel Prize. Michael, we are receiving it, together, just like we've done everything. The Nobel ceremony was the crowning moment of an extraordinary journey. Richard and Michael took the stage in Oslo to accept the world's most prestigious award, watched by their entire family and hundreds of representatives from the organizations they had founded. In his acceptance speech, Michael spoke first. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here today not as Michael Wilson the individual, but as a representative of thousands of people who have proven that social transformation is possible. This prize doesn't belong to me or Richard, it belongs to every person who had the courage to start over, every mentor who dedicated time to help someone, every business leader who chose purpose over profit. He looked at Richard in the audience. But above all, this prize belongs to a man who, at 50, had the humility to learn from a child that true wealth isn't found in banks, but in people's hearts. Richard stepped onto the stage for his speech. At 75, standing before the world's elite, he reflected on the journey he had lived. Your Majesties, distinguished guests, friends, 20 years ago, I was lost in a life of hollow achievements. Today I stand on the world's greatest stage because a 9-year-old boy taught me a simple lesson, that we are all responsible for one another. He turned to Michael beside him. Michael, when we first met, you told me you cared for those people because they were your friends. Today, 2 decades later, I can say we've built the world's largest family. A family that spans dozens of countries, all ages, all walks of life, united by the certainty that doing good is the only path to true happiness. He paused, gazing at the audience. This prize is proof that humanity still believes in a fairer world. But more important than recognition is the responsibility it brings. The responsibility to keep fighting, to keep including, to keep proving that love conquers fear, that generosity conquers greed, that unity conquers division. Richard finished his speech looking directly at the cameras broadcasting the ceremony to the world. To everyone watching, you don't need to win a Nobel to make a difference. You just need the courage to stop when you see someone in need. Because sometimes, a small act of kindness can change the world. The ceremony ended with a 5-minute standing ovation. Richard and Michael embraced on stage, father and son at heart, forever united by the mission they had taken on together. After the ceremony, there was a reception with global dignitaries. Richard felt a bit out of place among so many important figures, but Michael reassured him. "Uncle Richard, you belong here just as much as anyone. Actually, more than most." "Why do you say that?" "Because most of these people were born into privilege. You earned your place here by changing your life and the lives of thousands of others." Richard smiled. Even at 27, Michael still knew exactly what he needed to hear. Upon returning to the United States, Richard and Michael were welcomed as national heroes. There were tributes, speaking invitations, and offers for books, and films about their lives. But for Richard, the best welcome was the one at home. Karen, now 65 but still vibrant, Mrs. Gladys, 85 and still active in the company, Robert, Dr. Mark Anderson, Sharon, Sarah, Emily, little Richard Michael, now 5 years old, and hundreds of others who made up his true family. "Grandpa Richard," little Richard Michael asked, "is it true you won the most important prize in the world?" Richard crouched to meet the boy's height. "It's true, but do you know the most important prize I've ever won?" "What?" "Having a family like you. Even more important than the Nobel. Especially more important than the Nobel." In the years following the Nobel, Richard enjoyed a serene and productive old age. He remained involved in the organization's activities, mostly as an advisor and father figure to the hundreds of young leaders who joined the companies he helped build. At 80, Richard decided to write his memoirs, not a business or self-help book, but a personal reflection on the transformative journey he had lived. The book, titled "The Boy Who Taught Me How to Live," became a global bestseller. Richard donated all royalties to a fund supporting social inclusion projects in poor countries. In it, he recounted every detail of his journey, from his first meeting with Michael to the Nobel ceremony. But above all, he reflected on the lessons he had learned along the way. "The greatest lesson of my life," Richard wrote, "is that it's never too late to change. Never too late to choose to be a better person. Never too late to make a difference in the world." The book ends with a dedication to Michael, who taught me that true education doesn't happen in schools, but in life. To Karen, who taught me that a mother's love can embrace anyone. To Mrs. Gladys, who taught me that wisdom comes from experience, not age. To all who are part of my extended family, thank you for making my life infinitely richer than I ever imagined possible. At 82, Richard faced his first serious health scare, a mild heart attack that left him hospitalized for weeks. It was a frightening moment for the whole family, but also a time for reflection. Michael spent every day at the hospital with Richard. "Uncle Richard, how are you feeling?" "Physically, better every day. Emotionally, at total peace." "At peace how?" "Michael, I've lived a full life, fuller than I ever dreamed possible. If it were my time, I'd go happy. But it's not your time. You still have so much to live for. I hope so. But if not, I want you to know you were the best thing that ever happened to me." Michael began to cry. "Uncle Richard, don't talk like that. You'll be with us for many more years." "I'll do my best, but Michael, no matter how much time we have left, I want you to know I'm proud of everything you've become. I'm proud to have been part of your story. Richard, you weren't just part of my story, you are my story." Richard fully recovered from the heart attack and returned to his normal activities. But the scare made the entire family cherish their time together even more. At 85, Richard welcomed his second grandchild, Emily Gladys Wilson, daughter of Michael and Emily. The girl was named in honor of Mrs. Gladys, who at 90 remained the respected matriarch of the entire extended family. "Grandpa Richard," said little Richard Michael, now 10, "do you love me or Emily Gladys more?" Richard laughed. "That's an impossible question. It's like asking if I love my right heart or my left heart more." "You have two hearts." "I do, one for each grandchild, and each is perfect just the way it is." At 88, Richard received a special honor, the inauguration of the Richard Thompson Institute for Social Inclusion in New York City. It was a center of excellence, bringing together all the organizations he had helped create over the years. Michael, Richard said at the opening ceremony, when we first met, I thought I was helping you. Now I realize you were preparing me to build all of this. How so, Uncle Richard? You taught me that helping people isn't about money or power. It's about heart. And everything we've built is based on that simple lesson. The ceremony gathered over 1,000 people from various countries, former employees, partners, beneficiaries of their programs, leaders of similar organizations founded abroad based on the US model. Richard was moved to see how many lives had been touched by the work that began with a casual conversation under an overpass. At 90, Richard remained active and sharp. He joined family gatherings, offered advice when asked, and most of all, loved spending time with his grandchildren. One afternoon, playing in the garden with Richard Michael and Emily Gladys, the boy asked a question that deeply touched his grandfather. "Grandpa Richard, when you get really old, will you still take care of us?" Richard laughed. "Richard Michael, I am really old. I'm 90. But will you still take care of us?" "Always. As long as I'm alive, I'll take care of you. And even after I'm gone, I'll still take care of you through your dad, who learned from me how to care for people." Emily Gladys, now 5, asked her own question. "Grandpa Richard, when I grow up, can I work at the company you made?" "Of course, but only if you want to, and only if you study hard to be ready." "I will study. I want to help people like you do." Richard looked at his grandchildren and saw the continuation of everything he'd built. The third generation was already being shaped by the values of solidarity and compassion that Michael had taught him so many years ago. That night, Richard talked to Michael about the future. "Michael, I'm thinking of making one more change in my life." "What kind of change, Uncle Richard?" "I want to create a permanent fund to ensure our work continues forever, no matter the government or economic crises." "How would it work?" "I'm going to donate my entire personal inheritance to create a fund that finances social inclusion. Projects in perpetuity. When I'm no longer here, the work continues automatically." Michael was moved. "Uncle Richard, are you sure?" "It's your entire inheritance." "Michael, my real legacy isn't money. My real legacy is all of you. You, Emily, the kids, our whole extended family. Money is just a tool to make sure that legacy keeps growing." Richard established the Richard Thompson Social Inclusion Fund with a donation of 50 million reais, his entire personal fortune. The fund was structured to generate returns in perpetuity, financing social inclusion projects forever. "Now I can," Richard said to Michael on the day the documents were signed, "die in peace. I know the work will continue for generations." "Uncle Richard, don't talk about dying. You still have many years ahead of you." "I hope so, but if not, everything is prepared." Richard was right about having more years ahead. He lived to 95, in reasonably good health for his age, with a completely lucid mind. He still attended family gatherings and loved telling stories of the old days to his grandchildren. It was during one of these storytelling afternoons that Richard Michael, now 15, asked a question that surprised his grandfather. "Grandpa Richard, if you could go back in time, would you change anything in your life?" Richard thought for a long time before answering. "You know what I'd change, Richard Michael." "What?" "I would have stopped to talk to your father much sooner. I would have met all of you much sooner. I would have started doing the right thing much sooner. But if you'd done that, maybe it wouldn't have turned out so well." Richard smiled at his grandson's wisdom. "You're right. Maybe everything happened at the right time. Maybe I needed to be the age I was, in the situation I was, to be truly ready for the transformation." Emily Gladys, now 10, made her own observation. "Grandpa Richard, I think you and Daddy met at just the right time. If it had been earlier, you weren't ready yet. If it had been later, maybe it would have been too late." Richard was struck by the depth of his granddaughter's insight. "Emily Gladys, you're right. Sometimes the universe knows better than we do when the right time is for things to happen." At 96, Richard began to feel his energy fading. He could no longer participate in all activities, needed more rest, and walked with greater difficulty. But his mind remained sharp, and he cherished every moment with his family. He knew his time was running out, but he was at peace with it. One Sunday morning, surrounded by his entire family, Richard decided to give his final speech. "Everyone," he said, seated in his favorite armchair, "I want to take this chance while we're all here to say a few important things." They all gathered around the chair. Michael, Emily, the grandchildren, Karen, now 81, Mrs. Gladys, at 96, the same age as Richard, Robert, Dr. Mark, Sharon, Sarah, and dozens of others who were part of their extended family. "First, I want to thank all of you for making my life extraordinary. When I met Michael 40 years ago, I didn't know I was beginning the greatest adventure of my life." Richard looked especially at Michael. "Michael, thank you for teaching me that life only has meaning when we live for others. Thank you for showing me that family isn't just blood, it's a choice. Thank you for being the best son a man could have." Michael was crying. "Uncle Richard, thank you for stopping to talk to me that day. Thank you for believing in me when I was just a lost boy. Thank you for giving me a real family," Richard continued. "Karen, thank you for raising the extraordinary man who changed my life. Mrs. Gladys, thank you for being the grandmother I never had. Robert, thank you for proving that second chances work. Dr. Mark, thank you for taking care of the people we love. Sharon, thank you for showing that we all deserve dignity. Sarah, thank you for fighting for justice." He looked at his grandchildren. "Richard, Michael, and Emily Gladys, you are the future. Always remember, life is only worth living when we help others. Be generous, be brave, be kind." Richard paused, looking at all the faces around him. "My final message is simple. Keep taking care of each other. Keep welcoming those who need help. Keep proving that love is stronger than fear. And never forget that even the smallest act of kindness can change the world." A few weeks after this speech, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Richard did not wake up. He passed away in his sleep without suffering at 96 years old, surrounded by the family he had chosen and who had chosen him in return. Richard's funeral was an extraordinary event. Thousands of people came to say goodbye to the man who had dedicated the second half of his life to helping others. Representatives from dozens of countries, former employees, beneficiaries of his programs, leaders of social organizations, all were there. Michael gave the main eulogy. Richard Thompson was many things in his lifetime: a businessman, a social leader, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But to us he was simply the best father, grandfather, and friend anyone could ask for. He paused, steadying his emotions. Richard always said the true legacy he would leave wasn't money, but values. Today, looking at all of you here, I can see that legacy is immense. We are thousands of people who learned from him that life only has meaning when we live for others. Michael looked at the casket. "Richard, thank you for stopping to talk to me that rainy day. Thank you for teaching me that family is built with love, not blood. Thank you for proving it's never too late to change, to be better, to make a difference." The funeral ended with a special tribute, the reading of the letter Richard had left to be opened after his passing. "Dear family," the letter read, "If you're reading this, it means my journey in this world has come to an end. But don't be sad, be grateful. Grateful that we had the chance to find each other and build something beautiful and lasting together. Michael, my son in heart, you saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. Keep being the extraordinary person you've always been. Keep looking after everyone as you always have. The world needs more people like you to everyone else. Remember that the work we started together is bigger than any one of us. Keep going, keep growing, keep innovating, but never forget that the ultimate goal remains the same, to make a difference in people's lives, and most of all, when you meet someone who needs help, stop, talk to them, reach out, because you never know if you're meeting the person who will change your life forever. With all my love and eternal gratitude, Richard." After the funeral, life went on. Michael fully took over leadership of the organizations. Emily became his key partner in management, and the grandchildren grew up in a family that embodied solidarity and compassion. Solidarity Builders continued to expand across the world. The University of Social Innovation graduated thousands of social leaders. The Solidarity Network became a global movement connecting people in over 100 countries. But most of all, The family Richard had found by chance kept growing. Every new person welcomed, every life transformed, every act of kindness performed was an extension of the lesson a 9-year-old boy had taught a lost businessman on a rainy afternoon. 5 years after Richard's passing, Michael was in his office when he received a special visit. "Dad, can I talk to you?" said Richard Michael, now 20 years old and a business student. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" "About my future. About what I want to do with my life." Michael smiled. "And what do you want to do?" "I want to continue Grandpa Richard's work. I want to dedicate my life to helping people, like he did, like you do." "Are you sure?" "It's a challenging life, sometimes frustrating." "I'm sure, because I've learned from you that the only way to be truly happy is by making a difference in others' lives." Michael was moved. "Richard Michael, your grandfather would be so proud to hear that." "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Of course. Sometimes I feel like Grandpa Richard is still here guiding us, watching over us." Michael hugged his son. "He is, son. He's in every act of kindness we perform, in every person we help, in every life we change. He's especially in you and Emily Gladys, carrying his values into the future." That evening, Michael was at home with Emily and their children when Emily Gladys, now 15, made an observation that touched him deeply. "Dad, I was thinking about something." "What were you thinking about?" "Grandpa Richard always said, his story began when he stopped to talk to you in the rain, right? He did. Then our story is endless, because every person we help can help others, who will help even more people." Michael smiled with fatherly pride. "Emily Gladys, you've perfectly understood your grandfather's lesson." "What lesson?" "That kindness is contagious. That love multiplies. That every act of generosity creates ripples that spread forever." 10 years after Richard's passing, the family organized a special celebration, the 50th anniversary of Solidarity Builders. Half a century since that first encounter between a lost businessman and a generous boy, the celebration brought together over 10,000 people at Yankee Stadium in New York City. Former employees, beneficiaries of their programs, leaders of partner organizations, government representatives, and entire families whose lives had been transformed by the organization's work. Michael, now 51 and a globally recognized leader in social innovation, gave the keynote speech. 50 years ago, a 50-year-old man stopped his car on a rainy afternoon to watch a 9-year-old boy handing out food to the homeless. That chance meeting changed 2 lives, and those 2 lives changed thousands of others, and those thousands of lives changed millions more. Michael looked out at the audience, seeing faces of all ages, colors, and nationalities. Today, half a century later, we are a family of millions spread across the world, united by the certainty that doing good is the only path to true happiness. We are living proof that one small act of kindness can, quite literally, change the world. He paused, looking to where Richard would have been if he were still alive. "Richard, wherever you are, know that your lesson lives on. Know that every day thousands of people practice the generosity you taught me. Know that your legacy is eternal, because it isn't in buildings or companies, it's in human hearts." The celebration ended with a collective promise. Everyone present pledged to perform at least one act of kindness every day, keeping alive the flame Richard and Michael had lit 50 years earlier. Richard Michael, now 25 and a business graduate, had become the organization's director of international expansion. Emily Gladys, at 20 years old and a psychology student, led the mental wellness programs. The 4th generation was already being raised with the same values. Richard Michael Wilson's son, Richard Michael Wilson, at 3 years old, was already showing signs of the generosity that had become the family's hallmark. Karen, at 91, remained the respected matriarch of the entire extended family. Mrs. Gladys had passed away at 98, but not before seeing the organization spread across 5 continents. Robert, at 80, remained active as an advisor. Dr. Mark Anderson, retired but vibrant, had written several books on mental health and social inclusion. Sharon had become one of the leading advocates for the rights of people with mental disorders. Sarah, at 70, continued fighting for social justice through law. All of them, each in their own way, were living parts of Richard's legacy. One Sunday afternoon, exactly 51 years after that first meeting in the rain, Michael was playing in the garden with his great-grandson, Richard Michael, when the boy asked a question that moved him deeply. "Grandpa Michael, is it true that everything started when you were little and met Grandpa Richard?" "It's true. I was 9 years old and handing out food to people living on the streets. And Grandpa Richard stopped to talk to you." "He did. And that conversation changed our lives forever." "How?" Michael looked at his great-grandson and saw in him the continuation of everything Richard had begun. "Because we learned that when we help others, we become better people. And when we become better people, we help even more people. It's a cycle that never ends." "Can I help people too when I grow up?" "You can help people right now. You don't have to wait until you're older." "How?" "By being kind to your friends, taking good care of your family, smiling at people who are sad." The boy thought for a moment. "Grandpa Michael, when I grow up, I want to be just like you and Grandpa Richard." Michael hugged his great-grandson, feeling Richard's spiritual presence once again. "Richard Michael, you already are like us, because you have a good heart. And people with good hearts always find a way to make a difference in the world." That evening, Michael was at home with Emily when she made an observation that touched him deeply. "Michael, do you realize we've created something that will last forever?" "How so?" "I'm not talking about the organizations, the buildings, the projects. I'm talking about the values, the culture of solidarity that's being passed down from generation to generation." Michael nodded. "That's what Richard always said. The true legacy isn't material. It's spiritual. And looking at our children, our grandson, I see that legacy is being preserved. More than preserved, it's being expanded. Each generation adds something new but keeps the essence." Emily smiled. "Richard would be proud to see what the family he chose has become. He is watching, I'm sure he is." Years passed. Michael reached 70, still active and respected worldwide. The organization he had helped build was present in over 80 countries. The American social inclusion methodology had been adopted by hundreds of companies and organizations. But what made Michael proudest wasn't the numbers or the recognition. It was seeing how the values Richard had taught him continued to spread organically. Richard Michael, at 40, had become a respected leader in the global social responsibility movement. Emily Gladys, at 35, was one of the world's leading experts in workplace mental wellness. The fifth generation was also growing up. Richard Michael, at 18, had just started university with the dream of becoming a doctor to care for vulnerable populations. On a special afternoon, 60 years after that first encounter in the rain, Michael organized a symbolic ceremony at the same overpass where it had all begun. The spot had been transformed into a small memorial park, with a plaque telling the story of the meeting between Richard and Michael. There was also a sculpture depicting a man and a child talking, immortalizing that moment which had changed so many lives. "Everyone," Michael said to the 100 people gathered, "we are here, in the place where it all started. 60 years ago, the man who became my father in every way that matters stopped right on this very spot to talk to me. He didn't know he was making the most important decision of his life. And I didn't know I was about to gain the best father in the world." Michael paused, looking at the memorial plaque. "Richard always said our story wasn't about him or me. It was about all of you, about every life that was changed, every family that was rebuilt, every dream that came true." He glanced at the 5 generations of family present. "Today, 60 years later, I can say Richard was right. Our story isn't about 2 people. It's about millions who learned that life only has meaning when we live for others." The ceremony ended with everyone pledging to continue the mission. Each person there promised to practice generosity, care for others, and, above all, teach the next generations that doing good is the only way to be truly happy. When Michael got home that night, he felt a strange sensation. It was as if Richard were there, smiling, proud of everything that small conversation from 60 years ago had become. "Richard," Michael said aloud, looking up at the sky, "thank you for stopping to talk to me that day. Thank you for teaching me that family is built with love. Thank you for proving that a life dedicated to others is the only life worth living." Michael smiled, feeling in his heart the eternal presence of the man who had changed his life, and through him, changed the world. And so the story that began with a simple act of kindness on a rainy afternoon continued to spread, touching lives, transforming hearts, proving that love truly is the most powerful force in the universe. Every day, somewhere in the world, someone stopped to help a person in need. Every day, a new family was formed through the bond of solidarity. Every day, the lesson of Richard and Michael multiplied. Because some stories don't have an end. They become a movement, a culture, a way of life. And this story, which began with a billionaire seeing a boy feeding the homeless in the rain, became one of humanity's most beautiful lessons. That we are all capable of far more kindness than we imagine, and that sometimes all it takes is the courage to stop and reach out to someone in need. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a sincere comment below. Do you think Richard made the right decision by completely changing his life to help those in need? Do you believe simple gestures like Michael's can really transform the world? We'd love to hear your thoughts and your own experiences with solidarity and generosity. Thank you so much for joining us on this long journey. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories that touch the soul and inspire the best in each of us.